1, 2, 3, 4.
Hope we can get all our questions in time, but in respect to the Senator's other commitments, we'll have to break this meeting up not later than 5 minutes past 3. Got Christmas. You're the schedule man, that's good. So we try and break it up by 3 if possible. If not, we've got 5 minutes to wind her up. I'd like it, Senator, for your identification to introduce several people here. First of all, I think you've met most of the council, but we'll start here with Mr. Walsh, Mr. Schaefer, Mr. Morrow, Mr. Hom, Mr. Shadow. Oh, scoop that one. Mr. DeKirby, and Ms. Cobb. And on this side, down at the end of the table, is Colonel John Dillard, who is the new, relatively new representative from the Army Corps of Engineers in the Los Alamos office, and has proved so far to be a very good friend of the city. So don't pick on him too much. Next to him is our assistant city manager. Next to him is Mr. Bill Carra, who is executive secretary of the California
Water Commission. How are you, sir?
And vacant chair, Mr. Alan Hitch, our deputy mayor, and our city attorney, Mr. Ed Butler. I don't think any of the board of supervisors here?
Yes, I saw him.
No, he had to leave. You know? Anybody from the county water authority here? The rest of them, I think, primarily are observers, Mr. Senator. And probably you might want to make a statement or comment?
Well, only this, Your Honor, gentlemen, I am delighted to have a chance to meet with you during this trip to San Diego. I think over the last dozen years, San Diego has been the recipient of pretty faithful cooperation with the federal government. I remember shortly after I was elected, your city was interested in that Mission Beach development, and obviously there's a continuing direct interest with the Pentagon and the activities, particularly of the Navy, defense business. The little legislation I've got pending now, I don't think is going to be difficult to pass on your Tijuana flood control. Since I introduced it in September, it was, of course, immediately sent to the Foreign Relations Committee. The State Department has now officially endorsed it, and the Budget Bureau has interposed no objection. That's kind of a euphemistic way of saying that it's all right with the Budget Bureau. There is no dollar sign involved, although after the authorization were to be passed, then of course we'd have to appropriate the monies that are necessary. But I would hope that might be heard maybe in February. We don't convene until the 10th of January, and there's usually a little slippage in the first few weeks. So I would hope that, let's say February or March, we could have a hearing on it. But other than that, I'm delighted to be here. I've known your mayor, and I've known some of you people on the council, and I must tell you, and I'll conclude, I'm very grateful that this city administration should have been so generous as to pass the resolution which your mayor gave to me today, and I want each of you to know that I thank you. In this business that you and I are in, you've taken a few brickbats is part of it, and I think I may say that this last year has not been entirely free from that activity. So I do express my sincere thanks to each of you. Thank you, sir.
I think we have about 3 or 4 things that we might want to touch on, just primarily to bring you up to date more than anything else. We're not in a position to promote, I don't think, at this point. We do that in between times when we get you by the coattails.
Yes, sir.
But we do have, and strangely enough, I thought an apropos comment might have been on water today, that it comes in 2 sizes, too much and too little. So we're at either end of the scale, and this week it looks like we got too much in the spot. The Corps representative here may have some questions or some comments you wish to direct on the 2 projects, both Mission Valley and Tijuana. And if there's anything that comment you think the senator might be interested in at this point.
Not at this time, sir. I'll be responsive to any questions that you or the senator have.
Walter, do you have anything on either of these two major projects?
Mayor, I think we do have a few comments to make, and I'm not too sure that the senator isn't fully aware of just about everything we can say on these two flood control projects, which are vital to our community. First, I think I'd like to comment, Senator, that speaking on behalf of our employee group here, which is a sizable one, several of our people asked that I say this to you, that we want to express our sincere appreciation to you for your work in our behalf, on behalf of this state and country and Congress of the United States. We've watched it closely, as most of us professionals attempt to do, and we're sincerely appreciative of the fine work that's been done.
Thank you.
These two projects, one you've covered already, I think, pretty well, the Tijuana River project. The other one, the San Diego River project, I think also an unusual one, and the development in Mission Valley through which this river flows has been rather phenomenal during the past 10 years. It's expected this growth and development will continue, and I might add, it's unusual, I think, in one respect, that this city has guided growth in the valley so that there has been not a single improvement constructed in the line of the flood-controlled channel. All improvements have been out of it, so that acquisition of right-of-way or in development, we are not going to have to buy out any expensive improvements in the way of buildings or structures. The development of the valley has been very tight. There have been many residences, churches, there have been lodge halls, there have been commercial development, industrial development, just about every type. And now, of course, we are starting the construction of this multi-million-dollar multi-purpose stadium also in the valley. Actually, the development now exceeds $120, $130 million, and yet only a small portion of the valley is actually developed. Most of it's still, to a considerable extent, bare land. I think perhaps our community here has been lulled, and the people living in the valley have been lulled into a false sense of security by the fact that drought since 1937 to this year has given them this false sense of security. However, there's some feeling, I think, on the part of all of us that maybe the wet cycle started. San Diego River in the winter of 1915-16 had quite a deal, as you can see by the picture in the lower right here. There were over 70,000 cubic feet a second flowing in the river. 26-27 winter, as the other pictures indicate, was about 45 cubic feet a second, and 36-37 a smaller storm took place. I think it's interesting to note that this winter, in November and December here, our storm, the peak flow, we've had 1,500 second feet, which is about a 30th of the smaller storm compared to here, and yet we had some damage from this 1,500 second feet. And it's an indication that if we ever had a repeat of the 15-16 situation, most of the valley just wouldn't exist. And this does not include just the private development in the valley, but also our interstate highway, Route 8, which is our main route to the east from the whole San Diego region, would be included in it. And it's quite possible that we'd lose the bridges on Interstate 5 to the north. So between these two things, not just potential damage to private development, but just a tremendous, substantial damage, not just monetarily to the highway system, but in effect to the whole economic situation in our community if those two highways were cut. Now, our proposed project calls for construction. I might, John, do you want to show Exhibit B there? This is a small-scale thing here, Senator. The red line shows the channel that's proposed. The blue line is a flood area if we had a maximum flood in the valley. And, John, you might point out where Interstate 8 goes along there. Actually, in many places it's on the fringe. Someplace goes right through the floodplain area. So that would be chopped if we ever had that kind of a flood. The proposed project with a concrete lined channel 200 feet in width and some 26 feet in depth would run from Grantville, which is this place to the right, down to Marina to our left on the map, which is the present the easterly limit of the present flood control district improvement. We propose that some landscaping be installed on each side of this channel, and I thought you have that. See there? This will permit not only the use of this facility for its major purpose as a flood control channel, but will give the opportunity of recreational activities along it, bridle trails, bicycle paths, this type of thing that will lend to its use by a great number of people throughout the entire area here, not just within our city. This project, as you know, was authorized in the last Congress, but we do need and would appreciate your continued support, sir, in seeing that we can get appropriations for design and construction.
What word do you get? Is that going to be included? Will there be a budget item on that this next year?
We hope so. It has been approved to our knowledge by the Corps and will be before Congress for appropriation. Colonel, can you?
I think this will be a budget item in fiscal 67, sir.
Rather than this coming
Is that right? That's right, yes.
What kind of money would the Corps be able to use earlier? Any?
Skip, you'll have to... Skip is the chief of my planning branch here in our
Well, we can utilize funds this fiscal year 66, actually, for advanced engineering and design on this activity. Probably something in the vicinity of $50,000 or $60,000 without considering the overall program of the Corps. But basically, we in our own shop could probably utilize this kind of money. Yes, sir.
And
will be supplemental, of course. 66
to what your lump sum appropriation is already completely.
Yes, sir. We have our 66 million now.
It's going to be a little difficult in the absence of a budget item to include monies for worthwhile projects. You will remember several years ago I was able to put one in for that sewage problem of the Tijuana River, and the House kicked it out because it didn't have a budget item. So, and you wear out your welcome doing that.
We can appreciate that.
Well, anyway, I would on that point like to have a letter from you representing the community and kind of describing the dangers to the interstate system.
I think, Senator, probably would be one good question to ask at this point. If appropriation of that kind of money at this point, what did you say, about $50,000?
Yes, sir.
Would this in any way appreciably increase the time schedule in the construction, which might be a factor?
No,
Well, I reckon that's that question.
I think I can answer in part. I don't think it would increase our time schedule, Mayor, but it would do one thing. As you know, the Murphy Canyon portion of this project is to be a subject of federal reimbursement in connection with the construction of the stadium. And it would enable us to do the necessary engineering and design work in connection with that portion of the project and in coordination with Ed Gabrielson, here, the city engineer. We have gone forward and asked for engineer money to support our work, to support Ed Gabrielson on this. So in this respect, the $50,000 or $60,000 would be helpful towards initial reimbursement of that portion of Murphy Canyon, which falls in as a permanent part of the overall project. But so far as the entire project is concerned, I don't think it would help too much.
Is there any more critical urgency by reason of the heavy rains now? I mean, if you were to anticipate a repetition, for example, does that make this project a more urgent one in the opinion of the Corps?
Well, in our opinion, it would by virtue of the instant contract on the stadium. Because if you had a heavy flow of water in here, this would materially delay the construction of the stadium. Ed, can you support that?
That's right.
This is the contracting officer on that, the city. But this would materially interfere with your project design.
That's right. We have to build a diversion before we can even enter into the stadium project.
Speaking of a dollar and cents value involved, if we were to get a major flood, what type of liability would be incurred just to the interstate system taking it out, or is it subject to that sort of damage? Are we talking millions of dollars?
Well, I think the damage to the system is really secondary to the damage it would do to the economy of this whole area by cutting this major route, the only major route we have to the east. So this would be just catastrophic in its impact on the community. We might have $1 million or $2 million damage to the road system, but that would be peanuts to the overall problem that would be created if that road was ever cut.
You develop that a little bit when you write to me first part of January.
This, I might point out, our rains so far this year have not been disastrous in this valley, primarily because of this long drought period. All our reservoirs were at the bottom. We have substantial capacity in those reservoirs. They are absorbing us. The main storm hits from the coast, not inland. If those reservoirs were filled and the same storm hit, we would have a disastrous condition in Mission Valley. The savior was that we've had this drought preceding this rainstorm.
How much was the authorization? What was the price tag?
$14,600,000.
On Mission Valley?
Yes, sir.
They're about the same on Tijuana.
Yes, sir. That's about 14.5.
That's the total cost, or is that the combined assessed cost?
That's the federal cost. The local cost, in addition, would be $1,900,000 on Mission Valley, and I don't know what it is at the moment on Tijuana, but it's very close to the same.
Was that figure roughly 3?
Two.
Roughly 3.
And
the problem of the budget coming up is saying that the accrual land
Okay,
enrichment
get
fund
this
has to be
message
met
down
double,
right
which
away.
has changed the picture.
there's one other cost I think you should know, sir, and this is $5.8 million, which is the cost of land and relocation at Mission Valley.
Which was authorized too as part of that, Colonel?
Yes, sir. In the 65 flood control. And then, of course, our annual O&M local cost would be $45,000, according to our business.
Right-of-way cost is that the state cost now?
We call it local
I
cost.
see.
It'd be land and relocation.
Yeah,
Right.
It's reimbursed actually by the state. This is one of the reasons, Senator, we have fought so hard to keep this land free so we didn't end up buying expensive improvements and to try to keep these costs at a minimum. I'd like to just very briefly make a couple of comments on the Tijuana project, because this is a unique one, as you know, Senator. I think unusual from every respect. One point that we think is important to the project is that the city has been working cooperatively with the federal government, the state government, and our local governmental agencies here in the development of a plan for this entire area. The construction of this flood control channel through the Tijuana River Valley will actually give us a basis for moving ahead with what this planning program sets out, and this program is just coming to a conclusion at this time. So the two would mesh pretty well. Secondly, without it, we do run into a real problem in our relationship with our friends in Mexico, because we create, if we leave their channel come down without carrying it on, we create some rather difficult positions and some backflow into Tijuana below where their channel enters into the United States. And in addition, they would have to string out their development, spread it as it joined the United States boundary. This takes out of the ability for development a considerable acreage that they want to develop.
Is that so?
So they are very much interested in seeing us get going on this thing and put the channel through. And we have a third problem with it, in that it does, of course, make use of this whole valley area, which is proposed, incidentally, for both park use, cultural development use, a lot of interchange uses, international interchange uses. It just prevents any of them taking place until the channel is built. So any help that you can give, and we know you've been doing a great deal on it there, would be appreciated.
I don't think that we will have any trouble, and it will be a question of scheduling it for hearing, but I think it'll move right along.
Fine. Wonderful.
if we showed any type of real emergency, is there any way to any way to get funds?
The Budget Bureau, from time to time, will revise its position, and in addition to the appropriation bill for the Army, the Corps of Engineers, and the Bureau of Reclamation, there are supplemental appropriation bills, and you get based on updated information, the Bureau from time to time will recommend an additional item. And I tell you, the Senate has treated this kind of a problem very liberally. I don't like to use liberal and conservative anymore. But little Alan Ellender, the chairman of the subcommittee which deals with this subject, is a great friend of the Corps of Engineers and vice versa. And, well, I put it this way. First of all, if a item is not budgeted, but the House of Representatives puts it in, the Senate will approve that item automatically. But it doesn't work the other way around, or at least didn't when I put in that sewage disposal item in the Senate. And that goes back, I suppose, to the old Constitution argument that the House has to originate these. But I would think if you can make a case out on a more urgent basis for your monies for your Mission Bay, you might even want to consider asking the Budget Bureau if the city could present its case to the Bureau on kind of a little, basis of a rehearing, if you deem it real important. Because with that approval, then you have no problem. We in the Senate, where the Budget Bureau has approved items, we try to minimize the amount of testimony to the city. This is the interest of time. And I think it's something for the city to think about. I mean, if you're convinced that this is really a problem which, with a wet cycle, heavy commencing, I think it's something that you might want to consider doing.
Yeah, we have, Senator, for your information here, a rather unusual problem existing today. The Mexican government constructed a fill across what we call Smuggler's Canyon, which is on the Mexican side
because
of the
what
border.
happened yesterday and the day before?
And the rain of the past few days filled the area in back of this highway fill with water. We have 900 acre feet in back of this fill. We've had to evacuate the people down below, and just about 2 minutes ago I got a radio message from down there that the situation is critical and we've got to keep everybody out of the area. They're going to get drowned. So.
John, you want to show him on the map where it is? Down.
I'm not sure where it is.
Down, all the way down, all the way down the border, right there. Come this way a little bit.
A highway goes right through in here, and there's a fill right here, and the water is back in here at a substantial area. It drains this way.
Where is Tijuana, the city?
Tijuana's on the
west
west
side. I see.
That's the border.
This is the Mexican Baldwin Hills.
Well, she might point out the
Yeah,
military
yeah.
facilities that are in front of that tidal flow. The military facilities that are damaged by that flow, because you'll wipe out your naval airspace. Border Field is an installation that's operated by the Navy Electronics Laboratories at important locations for them monitoring certain operations. So this is going to be underwater if this thing ever breaks.
That's so. Seems to me then the Navy ought to be a little interested in getting along with this.
I think they are.
Well, you might be interested to know we have several of my people down there today giving some technical assistance to the IBWC. The trouble here is they didn't put the drainage in that we recommended to start with. And this very tenuous fill in here has to be, the pressure on it has to be alleviated. So what we're trying to do is figure out a way to lower this by pumping. And the three drains that they have at elevation 82 feet are stopped up. These are just 24-inch culverts. So we are trying to give the proper assistance down there, but we can't move across the border with our forces. Even the Navy can't do this, I don't think. They did once.
Can't we declare war on
Well, why should?
If that naval installation any considerable importance, it just does seem to me here's a place where the city and the Navy together can budge the budget.
Well, this naval installation, as I understand it, Senator, monitors all the radar activities in the Pacific.
No kidding. Well, I tell you,
Very important.
I would think that maybe we ought to all agree that something ought to be done to get it moving.
The Flood Control Project Center, incidentally, has a proposal to alleviate this situation on the Mexican side as part of the cooperative action that should be taken by the Mexican government on the whole development of the Tijuana River Flood Control Channel. This being a joint project, you might say, between our two countries. And this situation would be remedied as part of that project. It has to be, obviously, because it was not the flood control channel itself could be filled up with silt the first time that fill ever went out.
And we're still talking next year simply about a very modest amount of money to continue. We're not talking about any construction, anything like that now.
Well, now on this one, Skip can supplement my remarks, but we've done all the basic engineering for the IBWC, and Mr. Frederickson, I believe it's Mayor Erickson, we've asked him, is there anything more that we can do? And our word is just to sit tight that they are prosecuting this through the State Department, I presume, for funding.
That's right. That's the way it
This looks to be a joint.
Yes.
Joint
Well,
deal.
actually, I guess the Mexican government has got what, $100 million program all across the border.
That's correct.
Yeah. Well, now, just roughly, just for my information, how much of that $14 million then do you have in mind?
on this project here?
Senator, as I understand it, the State Department was talking about both authorization and appropriation all in one fell swoop for the total project. Now,
If on this one, I would think that there is a companion bill in the House of Representatives. I would think with all this problem, I would think that the companion bill should move simultaneously, and the prod then would come from the State Department based on the interest not just of the city but on the Navy as well. And that being so, you could pick up a budget item almost immediately. I mean, this doesn't have to wait with that kind of push behind it.
I think Commissioner Friedkin has made this sort of a representation, actually.
Yeah, he's a pretty good man, isn't he?
Yep.
Compounded by the fact we do have the State Department and the International Boundary Water Commission involved in it, as well as the Corps and the city and the Navy.
Sure.
A few other people.
Okay.
I think I've covered everything.
Covered the two principal.
Thanks, that's helpful, Mayor.
May I go back to one question that you had, Senator, on the Mission Valley project? You asked what the damages would be if we had water there. And using the chart that we have, which is based on a standard project flood which we used in our consideration, if we had that flood, there would be a physical damage today of $19,961,000, plus the losses or costs of business losses would be $4.874 million, for a total of $24,835,000. Now these are figures that were derived in 1963, so presumably there would be some small increase to that. Plus, there has been some development that's taken place, and we have no way to give you a precise figure on that today. But in order of magnitude, $25 million. And this is in response to the question which you asked. Average future conditions, on average future conditions up to the year 2060, about, would be $37 million loss. That's a straight line forecast.
Can I ask a question, Colonel, on something that was brought up? On this dam that's developed down here, my understanding is that we're just giving them advice and technical assistance, but no forces, either Navy, city, or otherwise, are able to... We may not have a couple of fields to protect if it breaks as you say it might break.
Well, our response was to Mr. Erickson, who called us and asked us for this technical assistance last night. They were down there early this morning. I have a soils man and an engineer down there, and we, of course, in our own staff discussed ways and means of getting this water out. We advised, let's get some pumping equipment and start pumping right away. But there's a problem on getting the pumping equipment down there. There's no roads down there, and you can't get out there, so we thought about swinging this out on a platform with a crane, getting it down close to the water, you see. I haven't been down there. This came up last night to our attention. We can't commit forces under Public Law 99 across the border, except on the request and authorization through the proper channel.
Is there equipment
And they
available?
haven't asked for that.
Is there equipment available that the city could, or that the Mexican government could lease in regards to alleviate that? Because we've got our own protection to worry about as well as theirs.
Oh, I don't know the answer to that.
Mr. Erickson said that there are no large capacity pumps available in the San Diego area or in Mexico. So we have explored the market in Los Angeles, and we find pumps are available there. And if IBWC wants these pumps, we can get them for them immediately.
Well, not only that, if they ask us for this kind of assistance, we'll give it and then answer questions later on. This is not time to argue about that. If that was
We're doing the
concern.
thing.
Okay.
We have, so that everybody be appraised, including the senator, we have men on site at the present time, radio communication, we have telephone communication that breaks down because of the fire problem of getting to and from site and so forth. So we have radio set up, our own radio set up on that site. And we're doing everything that we can in relation to the limitations, political and otherwise, that are imposed on us by dealing with a foreign country. It's a little bit complicated.
How many people were evacuated from that area?
About 26 families
Yeah.
so far. The senator just made a suggestion that if he can break this up in a few minutes, he would like to make a call from our office to the State Department. He might have some information for us. So if we can, and get so each of the council might have an opportunity to direct a question to the senator, can we direct a simple, straight question if you have one that you'd like to direct to the senator? Starting with Helen, anything?
I'll pass and let him make a phone
I
call.
just not a thing.
I have plenty, but they wouldn't be simple.
Then I don't think you get the answer.
Jack has to. Jack?
I just want a senator on the resolution which we passed today. Are there any organizations in California you'd like us to send copies of it to?
Yes, I think there are.
Alan?
No, I think what the senator is going to do in the way of a telephone call is far more important than any question I could ask.
Well, truthfully, I think the telephone call is going to be dealing with the Peruvians.
Oh, well, that's important.
That's darn important.
This area. Oh,
I would like to direct a question to you, Senator. We've been, my office has been prevailed on to take a position in this Peruvian incident. And I go back in history about 4 years when this occurred once before, and at that time we called together the people in the community officials and suggested, when we had a friend of Mr. Alexis Morrison, when he was our ambassador to OES, that rather than trying to go through the State Department, that we use basically what you're suggesting in your proposed legislation, that we use the economic pressures that would be available to us either through OES or AID programs, those kind of things. At that time, we could not get community consensus that this was the way to approach the subject. Do you have any suggestions to make to our office in relation to the limited capacity in which we can function in foreign affairs? I'm well aware of our limitations.
Well, yeah, and these are difficult matters. I don't believe the Congress of the United States has got any business laying down foreign policy and trying to tie the hands of the chief executive, and that's the way I've kind of made the basic principle for my vote. There are, however, exceptions. We began having property expropriated in a number of foreign countries. Americans were denied any satisfaction after their properties were confiscated, and the Congress adopted an amendment to the Mutual Security Act, which provided in so many words that if you expropriated property, you weren't going to get any assistance from this country. That hardly qualifies as a free, friendly country if you take it away and don't give anything for it, under their laws, not ours. And as a result of that, one South American country backed away from a outright expropriation, and Ceylon, after having done so, backed up and paid. And by the same token, there has been a long continuity of these regrettable episodes from several countries. I think that part of the answer is going to come eventually when all nations agree on what constitutes freedom of the seas. The Soviet Union, for example, has a 12-mile claim, which may not be an unreasonable one, but 200 miles you don't justify. I mean, that's I don't see how any of our friends in this hemisphere can make that claim. Now, having said all that, I'm not so sure, first of all, I'm not so sure that I should advise my friends in municipal government what to do, but this is an international problem. It is true that your constituents, some of them, are involved, and if you want to express your very deep regret. But I'm inclined to think, well, it's just like me when I come back here to California and they ask me some question about a bill in the legislature. I don't want to borrow trouble. I have enough. And you've got enough. And I don't know. Just depends on how much indignation you got.
I'm getting the message. Okay. Any other questions? Well, Senator, on behalf of the council, myself, our management people, and the people of the community, we feel it's a real privilege and a pleasure to have you with us. And we just, I'm sorry that we don't have more time to spend with us. We don't have to do that.
Well, Frank, I thank you very much, and I thank you, ladies and gentlemen on the council. This is a good experience for me to have, and I do want you to know, and I'm sure I flatter myself you do. My staff and I try to be of service to our people in the state, where we can help in any fashion, legislatively or otherwise. Your administration and this city and this county, obviously that's part of our duty. And I hope it won't be this long again when I come back here. This is a pretty big state, and when I come back here I'm usually running around in circles. But I look forward occasionally to meeting with you, and meanwhile it's a treat to me. I won't forget all that you people have told me, particularly when you're going to put it in writing anyway. So thank you very much, gentlemen, for an opportunity to talk with you.
Thank you, Mr. Senator.
You know we can remember us with the...
Beg your pardon.
We're waiting for, I can't say, two assemblymen. We hope to be here by 10, so we get on with the docket. We have some state people here from the park board. We do not anticipate we'll get into any specifics on any of the sites that will be discussed this morning, but we will get a resume from the state people, and in terms of the number of the sites that have been submitted to the state group, and then a report from Mr. Giddings, who appeared before the council, Restoration Doug, who appeared at the recent hearing on behalf of the city, and give an evaluation of what is being proposed, or possible proposals for the expenditure of state bond fund acquisition money in San Diego. Mr. Boucher?
Yes. Well, these are the five that we've been asked to brief you on this morning. The five sites, the Torrey Pines up the coast. That was a portion of the legislative resolution that just covered the whole San Diego coast. We studied other areas, not done this, but been asked to report this on the Torrey Pines, which is an extension of the existing Torrey Pines Park, going across the low ground and taking in some of the luggage area over on the other side, as well as the little panhandle area, which we didn't include in our recommendation, but we did recommend the extension of this other area, and a rather wide corridor leading across 101 and into this rugged area on the other side. Moving on down to Old Town, I don't know how much detail you want me to go in on this, Mr. Mayor, but
I think you talked about generals at this point.
our study includes a 6.5 block area of the old town, which would include the restoration of the old town and enough parking around the outer edge. That amounts to around 18 acres, 18 and a half acres, just rough map measurement. And the Silver Strand was included in our overall San Diego County beach study, which includes this area known as the Hub Ranch over on the bay side, in which we thought there was a possibility of having camping that would enhance the existing Silver Strand, which will probably get much more use when the bridge is in. And then the Border Park, which is a little bit in limbo because of the Navy land in there. You can't get to the beach without crossing the Navy land. How long they're going to be in there, just what they're doing in there, no one seems to know. And then but which in our opinion would make a very fine park. It has lots of possibilities, but when it can be done, there's a big question because of the Navy land and when the channel will go through there. We can get to the Mesa Park, which has a lot of possibilities for camping. And then the Fortuna Mountain, which has a lot of good points and a lot of bad points. The question of whether there's statewide interest there, it'd be a very expensive site to develop. It's just a dry, big mound, not particularly spectacular. It has some historic interest, but dry. What water is in there is comes partially, at least from the sewage plants above. That is a quick go-around of this thing. If there are any questions, we'll try to answer them. I don't want to go too far into detail on this thing unless you want it.
Could you give us some inkling of what the staff people think from your point from your staff or from the commission's point of view in relation to preferences on their part?
Well, I've worked personally very close to the old town. I got the feeling rather affectionate for it. It's one we recommended, but the commission didn't see it that way. The way we're just a group of people trying to assemble the facts and give to the commission for their recommendation, and with the aid of consultants who ran all these data through a computer and to try to pick the best group of projects, not the best, and certainly not the worst, but I guess you might call it a sort of a bargain basement package, and that's what they came up with. And I believe that's what their recommendation is now. And I was rather surprised that San Diego came out with a rather big sum of money rather than pinpointing things, so it's largely up to you people and the things you want to push those things now and keep in touch with us and the commission to see if you can finally come out of this final package.
Your Honor, I'd like to ask, do you have any estimate on what the site acquisition is in each of those cases?
Nothing that we can talk about officially. I think you can understand why.
Yes, but I thought you might. For instance, at Fortuna Mountain, I don't have any idea what, and I guess other people don't either, what amount of money you have in mind.
Of course, we do have some estimates. Really, I'm not free to divulge those.
I see.
And I think you can understand why.
Okay.
We try to make allowance for escalation in costs, and of course there's overhead costs and there's development costs, so we've tried to lump them all together, and I can give you some figures and others I'm not privileged.
All right.
The purpose of the discussion this morning, the only thing we're talking about is acquisition. Acquisition is all we're talking about this morning.
That's all my question.
Giddings, did you want to make a report on your encounter with the park board?
That is precisely what it was. On behalf of the city, I took a message to the State Park Commission advising them that the establishment of an historical park in Old Town was desirable from the city of San Diego's standpoint. In the presentation, we did not attempt to pinpoint or define the type of park, the boundaries, nor discuss the implementation of the program. We understood that it was strictly a matter of money which the state wished to allocate for the purpose of acquiring for permanent park usage in
California certain land. We advised the State Park Commission that in our opinion, the historical aspects of Old Town were significant enough to warrant the state acquiring fee land in Old Town for the future establishment of an historical park. Secondarily, we filed with the Commission without oral presentation a report to the effect that we also felt there was some merit in the establishment of a bordered park, and went on to the effect that if for beach and beach park purposes there was money available, that we would recommend the acquisition of land for the establishment of the future bordered park. And that was the extent of the presentation. There were no comments from the Commission. There was presented to the Commission a report by the San Diego Chamber of Commerce supporting the report which the city officially had made through my office, and also there was a presentation made by an attorney stating that there were certain groups, particularly within the Old Town area, opposed to the program as recommended by the city.
Actually, the city didn't recommend the program, we just recommended the philosophy of adoption.
We recommended the establishment of an historical park.
Well, in our presentation to the Commission, the data that we put together, it made Old Town look real good, and I was real disappointed that it wasn't one of the favored few. But in the long run, we studied this from what would happen the first 5 years, and then what would happen in the next 15 years. This is all based on a 20-year program, and I don't know whether my counts are right. I had very little to go on the anticipated visitation, but I think it would be very good, and it looks like in the long run it might turn out to be a profitable thing rather than something that we run the whole line every year like we usually do on most of ours. We don't plan on breaking even, but if we do, well, that's just fine. Yeah, San Diego Old Town looks very good in that respect.
Shotty, do you have any comments?
No, I came to listen. Thank you very much.
Senator Shotty, please. One of the problems we have before us now is that at the meeting that Mr. Giddings attended, the state kind of threw it back in our lap, pumped some sort of package and said, well, now you decide what to do. This is pretty difficult to do unless we know acquisition costs, unless we know how we could prorate them out to a project or what a project might actually look like on paper. These are pretty difficult decisions. Is there any possibility that
as far as acquisition costs, I can't divulge any exact figures, but as far as border park is concerned, most of the land belonging to the Navy. If it's ever declared surplus to military needs, the acquisition cost would not be great because we can buy it at 1/2 the appraised value. But how long they'll want to stay in there, we don't know. And you can't get to the beach until they do get out of there. We can get to the mesa.
Now, what's the condition at, well, let's take each one for, that's the observation border. How about Silver Stem? What's the problem there?
I don't know if there is any problem, but the land belongs to the city of Coronado, and I think they're opposed to our acquiring it.
The whole town is basically private property?
Most of it's private property, all except what belongs to the city. You see, there's a little city park, Washington Square, and that other little portion of the block. The rest of it's all private.
How about Story Pines?
There's no cheap land anywhere.
I wasn't asking price on that. What problems we run into acquisition? Story Pines would be all private property?
All private property.
Fortuna Mountain is all USA?
Fortuna Mountain is, that would be 1/2 the appraised value too, but it's already been declared surplus to military needs. The thing against Fortuna Mountain, I think, is that it's not an area of statewide interest. It's, well, I guess it's something like Balboa Park was at one time. When you get sprinkler systems in there, irrigation, it'd be extremely expensive to develop. And I'm sure that was a great factor in deciding that as a possibility.
The State College also has expressed interest in that acquisition.
Well, I think they have a policy to apply for any land, or military land, as a surplus. They're
They just ask for everything. Sounds like the rest of the group, doesn't it?
well, they have an application in for the at least a portion of the ports at Marine Headlands at the Golden Gate Bridge. But I think all they want is a little marine laboratory. Usually we can work it out together. The same is true of Temecula Canyon up on the north border of San Diego County, 80 acres of which is in San Diego County and the rest of it in Riverside. They want that too. I think it would, if, I'm sure we could have worked it out so we could have both used it.
Well, the problem we're faced with at the present time by the direction of the State Park Board is to come up with some kind of concept of what we want to support in terms of their spending money in the county, right? Is that correct?
I take it that...
That is correct. We are required to come back with a recommendation of what the city feels they wish the state to do in acquiring lands within the city or the county for future state parks. It's up for us to determine what to recommend. I think this is, I gathered in San Francisco, the same as the gentleman is naming here, that the state's interest in Old Town is sincere, because it is of state significance. Being the birthplace of the state of California for Hispanic settlement, there is a statewide factor involved rather than being limited strictly for local use. And for that reason, the state has a real justification for using their funds to acquire the land, and ultimately their funds for development if that is necessary. You go to some of these other parks, and they will be primarily used by local citizens.
We did study the Ponto La Costa that is connecting the two, as you know. It has significance because it's on the ocean and it has a good beach. That's in addition to these. We don't know what will happen at Camp Pendleton. That's in a state of limbo now, too. The international situation being what it is, and apparently the present Simon Dock doesn't feel that he can give up an inch of his property. So we don't know what will happen there. It's in Washington for their decision. Well, essentially they said no, but they're still mulling it over.
Your Honor, I'd like to ask a question. You're asking the city to sort of make a priority choice on this thing. What is the timing on that? How soon do you want an answer from us?
Well, the sooner the better. It goes from the Park Commission, who acted on it at their last session in San Francisco, to the up through our channels, our director and Hugo Fisher, on to the governor. Then it goes to the legislature. Now they want that they convene early in January, but then they come home again and they'll consider this while they're at home and then act on it when they convene again. I think it's in February. So we're trying to put the final package together as soon as we can, because it takes a lot of time after we get through with it for it to go up through the channel and get to the legislature. So the thing is getting short.
How far away would we be from a plan on, say, like Old Town, which seems to be the closest thing without real major stumbling blocks?
I would guess offhand that if we went into the study of Old Town, from our point of view, in the development of Old Town, we're probably a year and a half, 2 years away from coming up with a plan. But I think the state does have a general proposal that's already been submitted, or at least talked about it in their group, and we could start from that point. I would guess that within, say, 30, 40 days, we could probably get an inkling of whether or not this concept works.
The plan we have for Old San Diego, I consider that your plan. Your people, we've worked very closely with them. In fact, they gave us the guide on this thing. And what we've drawn up is virtually...
I'd like to get a look at that. I've never seen it. When you speak of your people, you're speaking of our planning department?
Yes, our planning department. I work very closely with Larry Milne and the historians and Mr. Goff and all the planning department. I consider what we have here almost a copy of what they handed us. We have an artist down there that does a beautiful job.
People were saying they didn't like our plan. I didn't know we had one.
Well, I'll show you.
It shows our plan.
Where does this lie, seeing the planning department, in our priority list of things to be done?
What priority was
Mr. Goff, you
Well, the planning department budget for this year does include preparation of a community plan for the Old Town area. I think it perhaps might leave the wrong impression if we said that this was our plan, however. I think there may have been an exchange of ideas, but I think it's more truthful to say we were reacting to some suggestions that the state had rather than coming up with any kind of a plan ourselves. As far as our staff work is concerned, however, we haven't started any kind of a community planning program in the Old Town area as of this date.
Well, maybe I didn't express it, use the right words.
We tried to keep in touch.
Before you get started on it, we might introduce Mr. Barnes is here. Assemblyman Barnes and Assemblyman Mills just walked in. And Ashcraft, been waiting to see if these people came in. Might find out if either of you three gentlemen have a comment you'd like to make in relation to this charge by the State Park Commission to refer this back to the county for to this area for its determination.
Mr. Mayor, I'd say that as far as Mr. Mills and I are both on the Ways and Means Committee, for ultimately we decide the state recommendation goes to the governor's office. We had a feeling that the two best projects for the area would be the Old Town and the Torrey Pines. I know of very little objection, none of that I know of at Torrey Pines, or very little to the Old Town. Fortuna Mountain we felt was too expensive. La Costa, we're just starting a new project, the San Leo, just down from that at Cardiff. We're letting the contract January the 5th for about $700,000 for another group of parking and overnight camping. And so the two, we felt that of the different ones, we felt those were the two most practical. Jim may want to add something to it.
Well, I've been heard many times on this subject, I think, since the time that I was president of the old San Diego Chamber of Commerce. The great problem that we have, in my opinion, we have two problems. One is that we have some bond funds available. $150 million worth of bond funds were voted by the people in the state of California. We in San Diego have in San Diego County about a little over 1/20th of the population of the state. We should be getting something like 5% of the money, and of course we're not coming anywhere near it. If we don't capitalize upon this opportunity and develop Old Town, if we don't set something aside and move forward, we can't make a temporary decision. We can't decide we're not going to do it now. We'd like to have another look at it in 5 years, because 5 years from now the bond funds aren't going to be there. You want a state park, this is the only opportunity that I think is going to come in the foreseeable future. It's going to be a long time before such a bond proposal is presented to the people again. It was done on this occasion in order that money might be available for the purchase of property throughout the state of California while it was available. It was intended as an economy move in many respects rather than acquiring the property later. So what our decision is going to be is, are we going to have a state park in Old San Diego or are we not? If we are not, then we have to think of something else that we're going to do, because the entire community and the entire county and the entire state is interested there and should have. It is perhaps the most historic site in California. Other historic sites have been developed and have been of enormous value to the areas. They've been great tourist attractions. I think this would be greater than any of them. I think it would be one of the finest tourist attractions in the western United States. It would be ideal for publicizing San Diego. It would be educational and cultural exhibit of great value to the people as well as to people who would come and visit. If we are not to take this course, then I think we owe it to ourselves and to our community to have another course decided upon.
we can't sit and say that eventually we're going to come up with something, because I've been involved with this for a long time, and I never had anybody come up with anything that was acceptable to more than, well, acceptable to anybody else in the old San Diego area, really. We are told that private investment might do this. Private investment probably won't, because it isn't worthwhile to go in there now, except to build things like the Padre Trails Inn and that restaurant across from it, which are totally and completely inappropriate. What we're going to get is either continued deterioration or a different type of development. The recent buildings, I think, have all been inappropriate. Nothing good has been done in Old Town in recent years. So what we would have if we opted for this, I think, is just the beginning. We would have the state creating an area of interest, and then private investors would have a much finer and greater opportunity, because the number of people who would be coming there as a result of the project, they'd have a much greater opportunity for profitable investment, including the people who are there now. I have repeatedly written to people who say they don't like the state park plans. And I said, well, I'm not necessarily committed to one plan over another. For goodness sake, let's do something. We've got to do something before it's too late, before we get further deterioration, more intrusions of inappropriate types of buildings, before there's nothing left. What is your plan? I'd like to work with you. Organizations who have written to me, I've invariably replied at one point or another in the correspondence, what do you propose? How can I help? The only thing that's been proposed at all is an ordinance which would control what goes in, but that's not going to inspire any great investments, in my opinion, and is only a beginning step. It's just one step. And I think it's imperative, a good control ordinance on what can be put in, to making the whole thing work. The Old Town Park project itself, I don't think, is worth a hoot if we don't have the surrounding area being appropriately developed. And I imagine that surrounding development will involve much greater investment than what the state will do. I think we're at a crossroads. Somebody has to do something, and I think that the only proposal which has been made, which actually seems to hold any promise for actual constructive development, is this state park proposal at this time. Now, if somebody has an alternative, I'd like to hear it. I'd like to cooperate with it and see if it can be worked out. But what's being proposed? Well, let me put it like this: nothing is being proposed as an alternative, really.
This council, I think, collectively is real interested in the preservation of something in Old Town. Now, whether it's going to be by state park or it's going to be by private development, we agree with you. I think just basically we don't know what the solution is. Unfortunately, we have never had an opportunity to be exposed to this general concept at this time. Would it be conceivable that in the minds of people who are pressing for a decision that we would have, say, 30 or 50 days to air this in the community, say, let our park board hold a couple hearings on it or something, and get some sentiment from the community itself before we got committed to a detail of design? This is the only thing that frightens me, not the concept, but the detail of design. Then just perhaps the state board then would be willing to commit a certain amount of money into the area so that we could then develop a design that would fit match the fund. Is this conceivable?
I would think so. You might get more expert opinions than mine. But I think that there's going to be more decisions to be made in the future. That is, the discussions I've had with representatives of the department have been on the ground. They want to create something here that is not possible elsewhere. That is, they want to have somewhere in California a recreation of a community in the Mexican-American or Spanish-American period, which is by far the most romantic and intriguing to the general public of any period of California's history. You can't do it in Los Angeles, because where old Los Angeles was, new Los Angeles is. You can't do it in San Francisco or Monterey. They've got buildings scattered around, but it's not what would be done here. You can't do it in Santa Barbara for the same reason. This is the one situation where the old town was left and new town created someplace else, and the site is there which can be utilized at this point. Now, they feel very strongly that should be done. I feel that the most interesting period actually is the period of transition, because of all the historic and interesting figures who were in old San Diego at that time. It's contemplated, as I understand it, that it would take about 10 years to complete this project, because the $3.5 million here actually means more money than it would elsewhere. If we spend it elsewhere, it's going to be for acquisition of land. Here we spend it, it's for acquisition of land, and then following that will come the construction, which will have to come out of the future state budget. So in a sense, it's a foot in the door for further investments and further state construction, further assistance to the construction industry, by the way, which other parks wouldn't involve. But all this comes to the point that they agreed with me that after 10 years had passed, they'd be willing to reconsider the possibility of carrying the thing forward into the American period, because the transition could be the same. That is, during the American period, the big buildings, the Franklin House and the other buildings that were built on what were vacant lots. And as we create here, San Diego of the period before the American conquest, it then becomes a matter of building on vacant lots. It's an extension of the project and the same evolution which took place before. So they are willing to keep their minds open and consider other possibilities, and in this respect they said they would expect to have extensive conversations with local government and with members of the representatives of the community over the course of 10 years, because there'd be plenty of time for a good and deliberate decision on that. So I suspect that there would not be difficulty in reaching accommodations over a shorter period of time. That is, their minds, when I talked to them, were not totally closed. They were not saying this is what we must do. And I would think that the answer would be yes, that it's 30 days or more.
We got a question out there on the table. Schaefer?
Your Honor, I'm impressed with Mr. Mill's presentation. I understand he's a former curator of the museum down there and is well acquainted with the area. As an attorney, I can appreciate the uniqueness of the situation here we have where we have most of the land under private ownership, where you're going to have condemnation, negotiated sale for most, if not all, of the land that would be improved. I understand that there's a significant difference in the economic impact on San Diego when we have this state taking of the land, taking it out in tax rolls versus the development by private interests who may own land in the area. I'd like to pose a question to an attorney representing some of the owners down there who might be able to advise me and the rest of us in a few seconds on the economic impact between the two concepts.
I would suggest, as a matter of policy, our council conferences are pretty well limited to the council speaking, and otherwise we've got 5 minutes, and I don't think that's proper.
Right, and I was going to suggest that we're getting into some specifics. I think it should be brought up when we turn this over to a hearing, and let's not get involved in detail at this point. We're not at that stage.
Jim, you mentioned, you were talking with they. Were you talking about the State Park and Beach Commission, or when you said they were willing to, and we were considering?
The department itself.
Oh, the department.
Yes.
Okay, I got a little lost here. Is not this bond fund of which we're initially talking now simply for acquisition? As far as these funds are concerned, that's all it can be considered for?
That's correct, and that was a distinction I was making. If we opt to spend that $3.5 million someplace else for acquisition, in a beach area, for example, regardless of how desirable it will be, that will be the money that will come to San Diego. If we opt to spend it here, that will be the beginning of a long series of expenditures for construction and restoration, reconstruction and restoration of buildings.
Well, then would there be other funds perhaps available for assistance in planning this particular, because this is statewide interest, although we feel so close to it, is actually statewide interest in that it's virtually the birthplace of that. And another thing I wanted to know is that you mentioned that, or the institution mentioned, that the only public-owned property that was owned by the city of San Diego, does not this area include the county? Don't they all too?
Well, there are some other publicly owned properties in there, and let's not get into too many things at this point, because it's a minor part of the little area, but it is important.
That if we go into the American period, it would not involve additional acquisitions, because it's all within the same
all within the same confines.
Let me add another point, if I may, and that is that this, as I understand it, this initial acquisition will be it. People who are outside the confines of the park will not in the future need to fear that the state is going to move out and take their property. They will be able to operate assured that if they want to go in right next to it and benefit from the traffic and so forth, they can do so, because it's anticipated that the increase in property values around that park is going to be so tremendous that it will not in the future be feasible for the state to try to expand it. I'm not sure if I'm in order in saying this, But I think that is an answer to Mr. Schaefer's question, that this type of development, just as this development that we're in right now, added to the tax rolls rather than subtracting from it, the tax impact because of the increase in values that is created by the project itself.
Yes, Jim, you said that they were very agreeable and acceptable to, meaning the department. Well, assuming that actually you appear to be in favor of it, the department appears to be in favor of it. This is our first exposure to it. I'm sure we're all in favor of something good happening down there by whatever means is possible. But I haven't found that things always get through when they get to the department level. Now, I have a feeling there's some conflict between the department and policy somewhere in here, and we're caught in a sandwich. Is this true or not?
Could I speak to that? I think there's no conflict, really. Historians are like any other specialized group. You get two of them together, you have an argument. And if anything, there's conflict within our own organization. Some of the historians say we want to stop at the Mexican period, and the others say, well, it isn't complete until you go on and develop the American period. So if there's any conflict, I think it's very minor and nothing to worry about.
Well, I think there's some assurance, too, in the fact that what will be done in the future, that is the construction of given buildings, for example, will have to be funded from the state's budget, from the normal course of events from general fund revenues. Therefore, the legislature itself will be acting upon these items. And I think that this is a good deal of, or should be a good deal of reassurance to people interested in the process of the project.
To follow up what I'm trying to get to, when you hit this with the $150 million and we're getting considerably less than $5 million, are there any other areas of the state that have funds committed to them with no more planning than we have, or less planning in the park concept?
I perhaps am not the best person to answer that, but my understanding is yes.
Other areas have this, but the requirement is being placed on us that we must have concrete plans?
No, that isn't what's been charged to us. Our charge to us is we got to make up our mind what we want to do.
Well,
but it's pretty difficult unless we got something to work with.
That's the point I'm trying to find out. If Jim says that the funds are gone, we've had it for the foreseeable future. Now, with that, other areas of the state are they in a better position without any more decision than we've had, or even less? Have they secured recommendations from the department, from the board, etc.? What I'm saying is, does it appear that we're getting fair treatment on this, or are we being penalized in some way?
The only comparable example, I think, would be Old Sacramento, which I believe involved $6 million, something like that. Yeah. And it, of course, is off the ground and going by comparison. That is the decision that has been made favorably, I understand, by the Commission.
Is their plan better than ours? The thing I'm trying to find out, is their plan better than ours in advance, or
their commitment has been made?
They're working on a design now after they've made up their mind that they want to proceed.
As I see it, what we have an opportunity to do is to get back of some program for state funds, which this county voted very strongly for in the bond election. And this is one of the items where we could push strong for. I would suggest a course of action. This is the first time I've seen this suggested plan here, and I believe it's probably the first time any member of the council has seen it. I would like to see just a very, very brief explanation of this, let's say oriented us with this plan, and then further suggest that if the Park and Recreation Board is agreeable, that it be passed on to them to hold a hearing at the earliest possible date as to this whole program for San Diego, and possibly pinpointing it down to one area which you recommend we should concentrate on. Come to the council, and if necessary for the council to have a hearing, because it looks like if we are to participate or benefit from these state funds, we're going to have to take some kind of action, or let them go by the board, as we have done in the past. I wonder if we could, would that be agreeable?
Mr. Butcher, you want to just give us a general outline of what has been suggested in the vote?
Here is the alignment of the new freeway. Not here yet. Here is you're surrounded on three sides by the freeway. This is San Diego Avenue, probably haven't oriented. This is Taylor Street. And here is Washington Park. And it includes those blocks surrounding Washington Park with the addition of another half block, a little over half block down here. Now moving on over here, here is the yellow primarily is the restoration area and shows the buildings both in the Mexican period and in the American period, and the ones in dark are the ones that are existing today. The gray areas are set aside for parking. Now this area, this block in here, is really not a part of the restoration area, but would be a large restaurant and the headquarters, administrative headquarters and a museum. And it is in a general plan, about half of these would have concessions in them, so that it would be a living, moving thing, and I think be profitable. And we would hope that some of the people that are in business there now would continue right on as concessionaires in these new buildings. Essentially, that's it. It's a very simple plan, and what we're supposed to do is a very simple thing.
Let me ask this. We have no idea. I'm still back to dollars. We don't have any idea what we're talking about in acquisition cost. And this money is acquisition cost anyway. Totally. Now, can we? Still going to have a political historian's answer. Can we in any way say this is the choice? This is what we want, but we know that the money can only be used for acquisition. So can we select second in priority, for example, without putting a dollar sign on your second choice?
I'm not sure I understand that.
Well, we don't know what the acquisition is going to be for the old town. We want this. We feel that it's not going to take all of these X dollars for acquisition here, that there's going to be some more than this. But we don't know how much this is going to be. So can we, in effect, give a second priority? We also want this without putting an actual dollar sign on the second. Well, as you know, I'm interested in Torrey Pines Park as well. And we don't know acquisition costs there either. So if we came up with I don't think there's any disagreement on Old Town with the council. We definitely want a preservation here, there's no doubt. There might be some disagreement on the second choice. But could we come to that point and say, say Torrey Pines Park, because I would be interested in it, without putting an actual dollar sign on that project?
Yes, that could be done. It depends on a couple of things, I think, from that point. So whether or not all the other projects are approved by the legislature. For example, it might be that they would stumble elsewhere. For example, the commission has recommended the Silver Strand Park enlargement, and presumably that isn't going to be done. Well, this can happen elsewhere, and it might free some funds that might be made available here. But that is a chancy proposition. If we have the $3,500,000 which is contemplated for San Diego projects, and if this were made the first priority and the other the second, what might result is it might be that whatever is left would then be used for enlargement of Torrey Pines, but it might not be to the extent that would be desired. Now, I'm not sure that.
Might we see the plan for Torrey Pines Park?
This is one of the decisions that this council is going to make in its recommendation. We use a proportionate share of money, because that's going to determine to a great extent the design.
I wouldn't bet it.
Now, there will be no, basically this is just about preservation as is, because there are trees up there that are located someplace else other than Torrey Pines Street.
Mr. Mitchell here has developed this plan. I'll let him explain the theories that we worked on.
This adoption of one of our planning departments, right? What priority number is this?
Well, essentially, here is the existing park. Now, here's the Highway 101 coming up. Here's the south entrance into the park here. The Citizens Committee to the extension of Torrey Pines suggested a extension where the stop line is. The vacant piece of the park, myself anyhow, decided that this would be an appendage that would not be too advisable. We have a major thoroughfare coming off of your future interstate highway here. Therefore, you have a problem getting into this area, a problem of access, a problem of maintenance, a number of problems. So we cut this boundary back to the heavy line here, which would be a little better addition, though we still are faced with the problem of Highway 101 and the railroad cutting this area off from the existing park.
Who's the Citizens Committee for the Development of what?
The Citizens Committee for the Extension of Torrey Pines Reserve.
Who is it?
Somebody with Ashcraft might be able to answer
Who is
Headed by Dr. Comstock, many people from the University of California, many people from all over the county.
Just never heard of them before.
Well, these are the
They've been
people.
very active.
The original park, as you know, was donated by Ellen Browning Scripps to the state of California. And these are many of the people who have been in this project ever since it started.
The park is on up which is the southern end, or the northern end.
Dale, what are those trees? I don't even know.
Torrey Pines?
No,
Torrey Pines.
no, there's another tree in there that's.
Well, the Torrey Pine actually is the only place that they grow in the entire world other than the Santa Rosa Islands is in this particular area. In case of a fire or something in the present park and so forth, they would be destroyed. This would be across the road and so forth, and it'd be a great benefit, so the university says, for them, as well as has statewide interest. The commission has received more mail on this project than any project that is being considered.
Well, in answer to Helen's question then, and with Ivor's suggestion, certainly the hearing will go along on the other, but again, this is the first time I've ever seen anything on Torrey Pines, and I think along with the $150 million funds and getting our share, we should move ahead and have the hearings and certainly get the objections brought out and find out what they are. We might find that there are no objections on this and apply for this at the same time.
Is volume of mail a criteria on whether you do or don't surrender?
No, I think it's a bias so far as interest of people, how important it is for the preservation of this particular species, which there is no other in the world. And it's not a matter of whether it's volume of mail. As I say, statewide interest, again, this is one of the top criteria in considering these projects. The same way with Old Town, it's the idea that people from all over the state would be interested in that, and that's the only reason they would put the money into it. I would say I believe that of the $3.5 million, a certain portion will go for Torrey Pines, as well as a certain portion of it would go for Old Town.
Your Honor, I had a question to Mr. Mills. Senator Mills, is it possible that this $3.5 million allocation could be used or exhausted by development of the Old Town project, thus leaving nothing for consideration of the Torrey Pines site?
I believe that is possible.
Well, none of this could go for the development of
Only
acquisition, because while the bond, the language in the bond act restricts us to that development, access, sanitation, and safety. Well, those are already available in Old Town, so we're considering we have only acquisition money for Old Town.
So if we did use the $3.5 million for the Old Town, then the Torrey Pines development would wait yet another bond issue at another time.
That's the
Except that it wouldn't.
We're not talking about some other time. We're talking about what we're going to do now.
I'm curious about something that you said earlier, Jim, that 20% of the population, I don't know if you're talking about base or tax income or what is
1/20.
Or 1/20th, which would be we're talking about $3.5 million right now, which we may or may not get, but using your formula, why maybe we rightfully should have been entitled to $7.5 million. Now, I suppose there are different ways of figuring this thing, but where does this arbitrary figure of $3.5 million come up? That this is your piece of pie down here, maybe if you go to work on it.
I think
So why isn't it $7.5 million?
I think that's what there is left after all the projects that have been approved in the rest of the state are considered, and they cost what's expected. That's what there is left. By the way, actually, there's also federal funds that will be there are federal funds which are available for such acquisition. Entire 150 wasn't for acquisition, although I think the total sum that will be available, including federal money, probably won't be too far from that.
now, but we don't know what that figure is yet. And, when it comes to acquisition costs, we don't know what they are until we get to buy.
Why does
the county allocation, too? The county allocation, $2.3 million in relation to the county project on top of the 3.5. So that
we're talking about $5 million, almost $6 million all told. Well, I suggest that Mr. DeKirby's suggestion is should be given some immediate consideration. Our Park and Recreation Director, or Chairman of the Commission, had to leave. He had a doctor's appointment. So he commented to me as he went out the door that he thought your suggestion was real good. that we proceed to refer these or all of them, as far as I go, to the park to hold a hearing. And I think the determination, Jim, on Old Town is one, like you and I have discussed before, it's a matter of sitting down and getting into some specifics, and we just haven't had a chance to do this yet. And the budget would depend upon the type of project adopted, or vice versa, and this is the position we're in at the present time. If we know how far the budget will go, we can develop accordingly. I think the only way we'll ever find this out and find out what the community interest is to refer it to the park, our park board, and let them hold a public hearing on it as suggested, and have them come back with a recommendation. What we're asking now, Jim, is it practical to give us some kind of a time limit, say 50 days or 40 days, 60 days? When do you have to have a positive identification from this community as to whether or not it will be 1 block, 2 blocks, 5 houses, or the 6 blocks, or whatever we're talking about?
I'd have to ask the commission, and maybe someone here knows the answer, but I don't know the answer to what the timing is on it.
Well, we were trying to get our packages, our final reports all put together by the 1st of January if we can. But I understand now that we have until February to put the final package together. We have the briefs. The commission has those briefs. And we're charged with having them in the hands of the legislature at the 5th day of their regular session. I understand that's the 5th day after they reconvene in February now.
Instead of the beginning of January.
Yes.
There's a lot of legwork that has to be done in our department and carrying it on up through channels before it gets to the legislature. So I would say it ought to be at least by the middle of January.
Well, we're not going into a problem of design at the moment. The hearing would only determine whether or not there's any merit in this design, and then we can modify it as we go along, right? I mean, to meet changing conditions or pressures in the community or whatever the case might be, but we're not committed to a specific, even if we adopt that map at the
In the
moment.
long run, certainly that's correct. As I pointed out, the representatives of the department did not commit themselves that they were willing to go along with further development of the American period by any means. But they said that, as with the passenger sign, they will continue to be willing to respond to local interests and what seems to be the most desirable course to take. So I think that aside from the bounds, the other decisions do not need to be made at once, and some of them will not be made for quite some time.
Well, this being the case, the unknown quantity on the dollar sign, I would, and I'm going to make this a form of motion, I would move that the park board have hearings at the earliest possible date on the Old Town restoration and the Torrey Pines Park, and put a priority, a number 1 priority and number 2 priority, realizing that the hearings may bring out information or conflicts which will cause a reversal of that, but when it does come back to us, I would like to see a recommended priority, assuming that one might run the funds out, and rather than getting a conflict there, they come back to us, and I would move that form of motion.
Okay. All in favor? Aye. Contrary? So ordered. Do I read in your motion that the council would also then, at this point, suggest that we drop further consideration from the council's support? I'm not talking about anybody else's, but our support of the other 3 projects as indicated here.
I think it's obvious there's not going to be enough money to take care of the first 2.
Right. But I mean, so that we clear the deck to these 3.
Confuse the issue, you know.
I think it's pretty obvious where the
most interest lies.
interest is too.
Okay, any of the park board people have any questions? The chairman's gone, and I don't know that this will help any, but any of the park board...
in my mind, is
yes.
this entire Torrey Pines area in the city limits?
I couldn't ask you. Do you know?
I believe it all is.
All is in the city.
The railroad track bridge
Any
is
other
in
question of the
North
board?
Town.
It's a question of when and where, Mayor.
Well,
we can
the
have our...
chairman's going to have to say it, or you are collectively as city chairman. At your
Bill
most
Bass.
immediate convenience.
We need some new conflict. We don't have it.
Set it soon enough so we have time to notice our hearing. As a matter of fact, possibly, if we knew when your hearing was to be held, we could announce our hearing and notice it, anticipating word from you.
Might I suggest that there are people here from Old Town? Are there? How many are here from Old Town? Just 1, 2, 2. Would you make contact with our park board so that you'll be sure to be notified of the hearing.
Yes, sir.
And the chamber is represented here, and some other people who are interested in the project. And if you'll contact our park board to have them notify you when they hold a hearing, I think it will be get good publicity, but you should be specifically notified.
I think the press would help us a little bit.
Should they? Anything further on this?
For our records,
Yes, sir.
could you mail us a copy of this resolution, the motion that was made here?
Oh, the motion is sure. Will do.
Thank you.
Okay.
Turn out to Grace's motion was real clean and very clear cut.
Tell us what you're going to say, Grace.
You make us all
5-minute recess.
And so forth. So all I can say at this present time to hopefully provide a setting is the council requested this conference to discuss with the Architectural Control Review Board its functions and whether there should be any changes.
All right, thank you. Let's hear from the chairman of the Board of Architectural Review, and I imagine that you will be speaking probably what is the opinion of the Architectural Review Board and its duties. Do you want to say something before he starts?
As a foundation, since this is probably what we're talking about, as one of the councilmen that has questioned the areas of activity and the reasonableness of having the board. We found ourselves in a position of hearings at the council on regards to appeals or protested forms of architecture. They came to us, and due to the procedure and the time difference between when you people heard it, the 30-day staying effect, which was the limitation of your power, that we had that even if we upheld the ruling of the architectural control, it was for 1 or 2 days. That's what we were talking about, and it seemed awfully senseless to us to have a board which had certain powers that when appealed to the council, that the only thing that the council could do was to extend it for a day or two. And this is when we started to get into say, well, how often do they meet? Are they an effective group? Is it worthwhile? Are there different areas that they could be active in, and so on? And that's why I'm interested in our meeting today.
Yes, well, we have, that's the general consensus about the areas of this board. Now, Jim, can you tell me, in the last few years, what areas has this board gone?
Well, that would probably be covered.
Oh, okay.
Probably covered by the chairman.
Okay.
We have a lot of notes here, and we'd rather condense them, or I have condensed them in a few I'll make, and then we'll pass this out for all of you to see. So if I can have a few minutes to run through some of these points, it might give us more material to talk with from there.
Take the time you need.
All right. I'll try to hurry it along, because there's quite a few points I wanted to cover, the board wanted to cover. And some of these I'll read, so I'll make sure that I cover them properly. For the past year, the Board of Architectural Review has held a series of workshop meetings to discuss how the board can best serve the city. And this workshop series was the result of City Planning Department letters suggesting joint meetings between our board and the Planning Commission. On November 5th, '64, Planning Commission and Board of Architectural Review discussed the need for a workshop, which type of meetings were conducted subsequently. Then on June 14th, 1965, the Planning Commission and the board met, and the board expressed these 3 points that they were concerned with. This is following along the general discussion that was had at that time. The board felt that there should be a continuance of the Architectural Review Board, and they had no objection to architectural controlled districts, which was suggested at that time. 2, we felt a need for increase to 7 members at least, and possibly, or the commission suggested that perhaps 9 members, which would duplicate the number of council members. We felt that the present ordinance should be amended to give definite power to the board, or appeal process, a definite approval or denial instead of the present 35-day delay after which the applicant can proceed. There is evidence of concern in the national press and citizen organizations for urban environment, a concern which extends beyond the health and safety provisions of the zoning and building ordinances. While the present ordinance for architectural control is limited in scope, it does establish concern with the aesthetic and harmonious aspects of our city environment. In course of the present situation, it brings us to our recognition more than ever On the national basis, and on the federal and state and local and citizen groups, there's great concern about our environment, especially as noted by the President's message on war on ugliness. The state of California has conducted a series of meetings at the state universities called the Challenge of Growth, and the governor has called the conference California Beauty Conference for January 11th, 1966. There exists a State of California Advisory Committee on the Master Plan for Scenic Highways. Nationally, there has been a White House Conference on National Beauty and a proposed highway billboard legislation. There has been formed a citizens group, the Regional Plan Association of Southern California, concerned with the total environment from Santa Barbara to the Mexican border. Locally, on the local level, a number of organizations are wrestling with the problems of environment, such as La Jollans Incorporated, La Jolla Town Council, Mission Beach Town Council, Mid-City Incorporated, Point Loma Beautiful Committee, Balboa Park Protection League, Citizens Coordinate, and probably there are a lot of others that we really haven't checked into. And it is interesting to note that this is especially interesting to us, and we wanted to bring this point up, that the large supervised developments such as Rancho San Bernardo and others similar to this have incorporated strict rules of architectural control through deed restrictions. Now, I suppose it's easy to do when you're originally developing a complex of this type. One thing in our studies, and we have run across, which we want to mention, is Seattle has developed something which has been brought to our attention more than any other. They have developed a Municipal Art Commission established in 1955. The duties, they act in advisory capacity to the city government in connection with artistic and cultural development of the city. The commission is concerned with city purchase and placement of art objects, city buildings, bridges, light standards, historical sites, and may even be involved in giving advice to owners of private property regarding beautification of or those contemplating erection of a building or any other improvements on their own property, which is beyond really the control of the city as we have it here. Other cities we have found out in our research that have architecture control are Santa Barbara. Now this is relegated to the general mission area of the downtown section of Santa Barbara. Santa Clara has architecture control. Santa Fe, New Mexico. And then, of course, there are, we understand there are quite a few cities that have written and asked for information about our Architectural Review Board here. Cities which employ and enforce deed restrictions for architectural controls are Beverly Hills and Colorado Springs. Now, if I may just go back and give you a little bit of the background of the architectural control. Architectural control has grown out of city planning, zoning, and citizens' concern. In 1916 and again in 1926, citizens retained John Nolan to prepare city plans, and about this time, city zoning of city was established. In 1932, the City Planning Department suggested the need for some form of architectural control, and this resulted in an ordinance providing a means for residents to petition the council for establishment of an architectural control district. The first was along Highway 101, and next came 2,000 lots in Mission Beach. Later annual reports indicate in 1938, 4,700 acres under control by 13 ordinances in districts in various districts. And in 1914, there were 19,634 acres, and it just 1940, 19,000 acres. And the point we wanted to establish here, it is well to remember that the residents of these areas petitioned for control. In 1954, the Board of Architectural Review was established by ordinance. In the period through 1964, the Board of Architectural Review handled 1,151 docket items. In 1954, I think in 64, there are 421 items, but volume decreased to 33 in 1964. So there's been an ever-declining amount of material that the board has had to act on. The board has considered the following kinds of things in their analysis, things that were brought before them: city recreation buildings, fire stations, police stations, Mission Beach restrooms, and buildings and ground leased from the city. For example, restaurants on Mission Bay. Plans for buildings proposed for property under conditional use permits, principally California Western University. The following, when not covered by established rules and standards: suitability of buildings to be moved to new locations we've been involved in. Proposed proposals by developers who desire to change lot sizes. For example, 25-foot lots on a sloping street to provide fewer lots more suitable to the terrain, the hillside terrain, for instance, adapting it to the terrain itself. We've adjudicated disputes about fences between neighbors. This has always been a problem. There have been quite a few cases brought for us. Metal buildings such as Quonset huts and A-frame car washes. Appropriateness of plans and materials for patios, such as the awnings. The new concept and promotional groups proposed widespread sale of these such things in the city, and they were brought to us for our review. Any architectural style or essential conditional violation of setbacks. For example, steep lots do not allow normal setbacks. One outstanding example of this one outstanding example of cooperation with our review board occurred several years ago by the Shell Oil Company when they presented plans for a proposed rebuilding of the stations in the city, and the board made suggestions which were willingly incorporated. The Board of Architectural Review has been concerned about signs, and in the early years considered many questions about signs. There now exists an ordinance for sign control, however, and the subject of sign is a continuing concern of the board. The board recommended an ordinance, and an ordinance was established for minimum room sizes. This was done in the very early period of the Architectural Review Board. Now, I could summarize, and I'll try to hurry through this, because I'd like to get an expression from other members of the board on some of the items I brought up. It is recommended that the Board of Architectural Review be continued for 1 year through the year 1966. During 1966, the board contemplates and proposes the following actions. First, we wish to have a 7 or a 9-man board. With this 9-man board, we will hold regular meetings, and at each meeting consider a particular aspect of the environment. In other words, we intend to develop a program and material to establish a final ordinance. Provide annual report to Planning Department Council of actions taken by the board. Provide for periodic or annual joint meetings with other boards which are concerned with the environment of the city, such as Planning Commission, Harbor 101 Committee, Historical Site Boards, etc. Through regular meetings, develop a platform for citizens groups interested in architectural review or related subjects to participate or present their specific ideas and remedies. Through a commission, develop 7 panels to meet with the board to assist in formulating a recommendation for a board of greater scope, perhaps equal to the Seattle Municipal Art Commission. It is proposed that these panels will be of the following specialties: architecture, landscape, signs and graphics, utilities and landscaping, which have a bearing toward each other, industrial, thoroughfares and freeways, and then the sociological and educational aspects.
How many points?
7. We'll give you a copy of all
Okay.
of this. And the individuals to serve will be selected for their special interest or knowledge in these specialties. The board meeting with the panels will consider the following: need for a policy for hillside buildings and canyons. This has become especially evident to us because of the lack of flat lots. I think more and more because of San Diego terrain, the hillsides, we think this is a growing problem and should really be seriously considered. Also, city policy on planting parkways, curbs, sidewalks, how to handle or regulate massive hillside cuts, very strong sign policy, house moves, the need for an ordinance to require architectural review and cleaning of vacated premises and landscaping for future locations. B, provide for architectural review of all structures proposed to be built on land where spot zoning has been approved. The best means for annual awards for outstanding contributions, such as a Shell Oil Company's response to the board's review of planned successful accomplishment. In other words, we feel some sort of recognition should be given these people. And the means, D, develop a means of increasing citizens' awareness of our environment, such as 1, annual high school competition, perhaps, for theme or model about our city environment. 2, a board developing a pamphlet for dissemination through planning department, title companies, etc., for example, about the planning of front yards or development and fire control of canyons and the development of hillside lots. The present board feels the term Board of Architectural Review is not adequate, and possibly, as suggested by Citizens Coordinate,
design advisory board will be determined to be more desirable to describe the function of the board with new duties if that is the result of the 1966 action as outlined in item 5 above.
Very ambitious.
Now, are there any other members of the Architectural Review Board that has something to say?
I might say this. Mr. Eklund, Mr. Philippi, and I have been on the board, I think, since 1954. And I want to kind of pay special recognition to Dale Nagel and Ernie Boldrick, who have done a great deal of research. And I'd like to have them make a few comments. And maybe Mr. Boldrick would lead off.
Mr. Boldrick?
Well, the point I think we should keep in mind is that we've sort of got a heritage thing going here. The Nolan Plan, Balboa Park, Mission Bay. In the current literature, you'll find San Diego frequently referred to in rather favorable terms. For instance, they talk about Los Angeles being 45 villages looking for a city. They're trying to appoint a Los Angeles Jerusalem Committee. We don't have that kind of thing in San Diego, and San Diego is not certainly anything like some of the eastern cities, and perhaps not as bad as Los Angeles. And I think one of the reasons is that this 1932 Planning Commission, Planning Department report, which asked for architectural control or suggested, and as I said, the Nolan plans, things before. So San Diego has had a concern with our corner of the country, and we think, I guess, that it's time to build the muscle a little bigger. When I say muscle, probably I'm indicating some kind of a control or something of this kind. That's not what I intend, but to have a platform, to have a way that these things can be exposed and some action can come from. For instance, Citizens Court is very vocal on this subject, and the Art Directors Club of San Diego is very desirous of employing their talent in graphics, particularly the city's municipal side. These people just don't have anywhere to go, and we think that some board appointed by the council is the appropriate one, and we can't think of one any better suited than the Architectural Control Board, perhaps modified and expanded.
I think one of the questions has been brought up that the board lacks a certain amount of power. Indeed, that seemed to be the frustration involved with both perhaps the council.
Particularly persuasive as it is now.
Yeah, persuasive. How do you feel this can be remedied, or have you any thoughts on this?
Maybe we'll find out from Mr. Nagel.
Well,
No, there's no such thing.
Mr. Nagel?
All right. I think we all agree that we don't want to inhibit creative imagination. All great cities have recognized the need for some type of control, and we shouldn't keep looking at just architecture, but it's the relationships of buildings and street furniture, which we call lamps, benches, the relationship of one building to another, the screening out of ugliness that has to exist. There are certain things that, like the utility substations, that are functionally designed, they should be screened. But as far as power goes, Santa Barbara has an ordinance which controls around the mission. However, the hard-nosed builders can't put up signs out in the peripheral area of Santa Barbara, and they don't. And these people need and rely on signs for advertising, but they're restricted, and they don't go down to fight the city council or sue them or anything else. But they come in line and live with those restrictions. Although it seems to be illegal, they don't push it. Some of them try to push it, but they're out there to sell their product, and they don't want to certainly make themselves conspicuous. So again, the question on power, whether we should have more teeth or not, or this I think a way of getting teeth would be to broaden the board and get more of these groups that are already functioning in San Diego to get behind it, so that that our rulings and the commission's ruling or the advisory board rulings and your rulings would have the general support of the public, and possibly it can be done without actual teeth. Again, I want to say, being an architect, we don't want to inhibit creative imagination, and but I can speak for the architectural group, the IAA, who feels very strongly that that San Diego, although it had historically been conscious of itself, we've got to maintain it and keep up with the movement that's going on throughout the nation and throughout California. And we feel our recommendations here to analyze this next year and have regular meetings to come up with a program is a very necessary thing. We are running out of time compared to the growth that California and San Diego is going through. But as far as power goes, we've got to study it. We've got to find out more about it. We have no answer to how do we get power. Maybe that's the wrong word.
All right, Councilman Scheidel.
I was just looking at the ordinance, and I assume this is the only ordinance by which you work. And I'm surprised at some of the things that I see in here. One, the Board of Architectural Review shall approve, conditionally approve, or disapprove the architectural design for the exterior of all buildings for which building permits are required by this code, proposed to be erected, converted, altered, and so forth. This would almost mean to me that this board's responsibility is to sit down in the building department and check all the building permits and see the pictures and so forth and decide whether it's good or bad. So obviously I've done this.
Yes, there's an amendment to that, I think.
Well, that's the thing I don't have. I need some of this. That's one thing. I'll go on while we're looking that up. But this is the ordinance by which you work. Then also, it shall be, following this, it shall be the duty of the Board of Architectural Review to adopt rules, standards to be applied to time, and so forth and so on. But at no place in this ordinance do I find where you have any power whatsoever, even of delay. Now, is this right or not?
Under the appeals section, you'll find the delay part.
Where's the appeals section?
May I read my board copy?
Sure, I'm looking at the law of the city like any citizen would come in and find out what rules are they working. Now, these are the only rules that I know that we have at this point.
It's still persuasive.
705. Someone was kind enough to give me this when I joined the board.
Oh, I got one too. I don't read it. Oh, somebody just tells me it's in here.
35 days it's in there anyway.
It is in
We have
here.
to consider
That's the time it's filed with the department.
We have to consider it within 15 days after it's filed with the planning department.
Okay, well now how about this thing where you're supposed to examine everything that a building permit comes in, every fence, every television antenna that's over a certain size.
They delegate this to the planning department. They've adopted certain.
I didn't see where the council has authorized them to delegate this to anyone.
Oh.
I'm only pointing out you got a pretty shabby arrangement here right now. It needs change, I think.
There's one provision in here in the ordinance that allows the board to delegate this review of plans and so forth to an official in the planning department. This is in the zoning administration division. And there are certain rules and criteria set up to guide the planning department officials in reviewing the plan. And if there is non-compliance with the general guidelines, or it appears to be a particularly distressing proposal in terms of architecture, then this is presented to the Architectural Review Board for consideration.
There's one thing that I noticed that is creeping in, and I hear more about now than I used to in regarding planning, and that is the word environment. And then I was interested too, Mr. Whitwheeler, in what you said about in conjunction with our environment, and you said something about the building in canyons.
Or
something to that effect. And I visited a community one time that had open spaces that left breathing space, and like our canyons, and instead of letting homes be built there, they put in, well, this happened to be azalea gardens. I don't even know if azaleas would grow in San Diego, but they had flower gardens and walkways through canyon areas that left breathing space, and at the same time, it was a part of the community that attracted a tremendous number of visitors. And the reason why I thought of that was from that word environment, which I've heard more about lately, and there seems to be more interest in this environment than was prevalent a few years back.
It'd probably be interesting for you to know that at the University of California they recently made a change. There used to be the Department of Architecture, the Department of Landscape Architecture, etc. They have rolled these all into one College of Environmental Design, in which the Department of Architecture is one facet, environmental design is another, city planning is another, and your degree is issued in the College of Environmental Design. So this is a general trend that they're all inclusive, they're all related, and they should be all studied together at the same time, and they're all in one big new building there.
Broader scope too that they have in university.
Institute of Urban and Regional Affairs. It's really becoming quite all-inclusive now. Then to get to your other point of the hillside houses, one thing that always strikes terror into me is to drive up in some of those hills in Los Angeles in the perhaps not the highest class district and see all the miserable houses with poles off the back, and I mean it's just tragic, and that can happen here. After you run out of flat land, they start building on the hillsides, and unless there is some design prerequisites forcing them to do something pleasing, it offends the opposite property owners.
Mr. Chairman, I can understand why perhaps this is a real sensitive area to give, let's say, a great deal of so-called, power, let's say, to a board. Now we have our districts. If we had a district, each district would be controlled. Perhaps different committees can be broken up in that area so they can judge each district. Perhaps that might be worked out. I don't know. But now, as time goes on, perhaps you can explain to me how these things would be worked out. Things like, the designs of Frank Lloyd Wright in the past was radical, and it became accepted, and then Edward Stone's screen process was some kind radical. Now we accept that. Now, how do we control these areas? That who can put this and what, and is it compatible? And this is what I'm concerned with. How can we evaluate these kind of areas?
Well, there's one thought I've always had in this respect. You might say, I have to answer this in a double-edged way. In one way, there are how many dozen engineers on the city staff, but how many architects? There's not one. So there's nobody involved on the city staff side to judge anything on an aesthetic basis. Now the AIA, I want to say this is the statement they made. They are concerned if a city architect were appointed that there would become a monster like the State Division of Architecture, which is a real problem with practicing architects. But we do feel there should be somebody on the city level with training in architecture. He perhaps doesn't need to be licensed, but he should at least have training. You get into a double problem.
10 years ago we had one planner.
No, you had an architect on the staff, John Fleming, and he worked with us for one time for quite a while.
I would first like to say that, like I said before, we don't want to stimulate creative imagination. Edward Stone, Frank Lloyd Wright, and the point of this review is to find some method to. Now, Santa Barbara, or some of the communities we're in the process of planning and working with, we don't just say all tile roofs to give this unity and this feeling of identity and village to a complex. We have to look at things on their own merits, and it seems a conspicuous building is conspicuous, like for instance, there's a trend now towards cave-like buildings. Well, a cave-like building done in a tract form would be pretty gruesome, but a cave-like building done where there's a lot of planting, buffeted by trees and other in space, looks great. And some of Frank Lloyd Wright's buildings look great when they are buffeted by when they're out in space.
Yes,
But a good architect will generally acknowledge the community he's in, and he'll relate his building.
But Mr. Nego, now that is today's thinking.
Yeah.
Now Spanish stucco one time was quite the fashion in the
Yeah,
20s.
it's coming back.
And then see we go, and then one time the great architect of San Diego was this guy named Gill.
Gill,
And
That's
he,
coming back.
yeah.
And
Now see, it took
Well, you've got to
60
think
years
right now.
to make that span. Now,
How about high-rise La Jolla, like 950 Coast Boulevard? Where were you fellas?
you know, I mean, this looks like
Never was brought before us.
Oh, well, this was your responsibility. Now, really, you're appointed representative. Now, all I'm pointing out is you can have a real problem with these things.
Yeah, yes.
And this board can become extremely powerful. It can actually become a real stumbling block if it gets real technical. I mean, these are some of the problems that we have to look at. And at what time does this level of enforcement develop? Or at what time does someone grab something? I think since I've been here, I've seen maybe you people have been before us, maybe twice, and each time in 2 days, hold your breath, it'll go through anyway. But really,
Dead. Poor fellow's dead now, so he's...
I'd like to recognize Councilman Walsh. He has a
one of the most feared animal of government, I think, is duplication. And a question that comes to my mind right away, there's two questions. One is, if you take your 7-point program and you lay it out, and we gave you the tools to accomplish what you want in the areas that you want, and then you take the mayor's historical board, which we have just, you might say, approved the foundation, because they're going to have to come back spelling out powers and so on. It seems that your 7-point program and their 7-point program is turning loose two well-intending groups in the same area, which gives this duplication. Okay, that's the first point. Then the other one is the one that Harry touched upon, is that in reading the areas of activity, signs, warehouses,
anything with a building
moving, and so on, that you open your mouth so wide that to close the big mouth, you don't get to chew very often. And whereas if you took specific areas like Old Town, La Jolla, or maybe the village, one section of La Jolla, work with historical ordinances that could be imposed on a one-lot subdivision, which has a historical building that could be utilized and preserved just as a one-lot subdivision. So I think you probably would get a bigger ear from the council, because I think there's, if we get so broad and so over-encompassing and give you such an area, that you'll do a lot of you'll become ineffective.
Give a 9-man board with teeth to cover the areas where building permits are issued. You're going to grind progress to a real slow halt if you have to take the time to go over each one of these. I'm looking at some of these planning commission hearings and council hearings and so forth, and there's just one more in there. So with Jack, I would feel this is pretty impractical. It seems like a great duplication with the planning.
yes. Let me, Mrs. Cobb is first, and then you.
Now, let me ask this, and I think it will help. I want to go back to present functions. There are 3 ordinances here. We're trying to find out what, if any, or each of them are still in effect. But you mentioned, and it's in this report, some 30,000 acres now under control of districts, and I gather there are about 20 separate controlled districts.
No, the whole city is covered by an ordinance which gives the power of review of all building permits.
Well, then these 20...
The district concept was abandoned, and in fact, I think the attorney's office determined that this was an illegal approach to have architectural control by districts within the city.
Well, that's real interesting, because we're considering several more at the time now. The attorney's never mentioned this to us.
Well, we're talking about the basis here. When the attorney's office
made its ruling, I think they determined that you could not establish architectural control over private construction in various neighborhoods or communities of the city, that it had to apply uniformly. You could not single out La Jolla and say in that area you can control or restrict the style of architecture, whatever, that you had to apply the rules uniformly. Now, there is authority within the state legislation, Mr. McGowan can speak to this, to permit historic and civic design districts where you can establish architectural control. For example, Old Town, a historic preservation area. You could develop architectural control restrictions legitimately for that area. You could develop them around, say, a civic area such as the concourse if you wanted. But you cannot...
Then all 20 of these are repealed, they are no longer in effect?
That's right.
Now, Mr. Eklund, you had something you'd like to add.
Yes, I'd like to make 2 or 3 little statements here, if I may. I am a realtor. I have been on this board appointed by Butler, Mayor Butler, some years back. I think it's been a real good board. I think we have done some very effective things for San Diego community. In the past, there have been a number of cases we have considered, we have held down, we have not even gone so far to the council. In other words, to get some of these things off of your back that are, from an aesthetic standpoint, that's not too attractive. However, let me state this, Tom. I very definitely believe that no one can put teeth into an ordinance which represents a point of view, such as I may look at a glass of water and see a certain type of a curve, being somewhat of a scientist in a sense, the fact that light rays bend. You look at it and you might see something else. I don't think anybody can say this specific thing should be acceptable or not. However, I think basically we all judge something which is bad design or in an environment in the neighborhood. And I think it's very, very important that there be some board or something to keep San Diego on a basis that is basically attractive. Yes, sir.
Well, Mr. Eklund, you sort of hit the nail on the head. Of course, we kind of bounce it around along the edges, too. That perhaps, to my opinion, it seems as though the only area the only way we can give greater teeth to this board and let them be more effective in their capacity with the talent behind it is to, however we call it, make these various so-called districts. How it's formed, I don't know whether it's formed by hearing by the people in the area to declare this as a district and then to say so-called conserve the charm of this particular area, whether it's 1 block or 10 blocks. This is the only area I think that this board can acquire teeth.
Let me state this, if I may, Mr. Hunt. I, for one, have not been in favor of any policy of this board. I am definitely in favor of persuasion, and I don't believe it should be anything but that, in my opinion. Now, let me say this. I think this particular board has done a lot of good work, and I think it addresses and thinks, and I think this is good. However, I don't believe there should be power within this board.
Well, influence, or what do we call it?
Yeah. Or perhaps the only thing I would, in my way of thinking, I would like to see perhaps a period extended to 30 days, 60 days or so, before a man could get a permit if his design was something that was definitely not acceptable to the environment.
I would like to have Mr. Fairman. He has a point here, and then Mr. Baldrick.
Right. I'd like to reiterate to the board our position in the planning department on this matter. We've explained this to the Planning Commission, and at the same time, I'd like to indicate that there has also been a more recent shift in our thinking in this regard. But back in August, we made a report to the Planning Commission as a result of the City Council referring this matter to the Planning Commission for study. And we gave a brief
report as follows. The Planning Department holds the opinion that existing architectural control regulations are ineffective and unrelated to definite community objectives. While a review process has been established, enforcement of architectural control is not possible. Consequently, the department believes that a new set of general regulations should be established which provide for the organization of an architectural review board. Specific districts should then be established with well-defined goals and objectives to be achieved through the architectural review process. Architectural control districts should be recognized as unique areas of the community having special character, historic, or aesthetic value. And this refers primarily to historic or civic districts. It should be clearly established that the control of architectural design within such districts is for the general welfare of the total community. General acceptance of such controls both within the district and throughout the community is essential for the accomplishment of goals. An architectural control committee should be established along current lines, plus additional advisory members who should represent designated districts. For example, Old Town. General standards for architectural design should be adopted to implement the defined objectives of each district. And then we indicate how such standards, what they might include. One particular district, which apparently is appropriate for architectural control, is the Old Town area. Considerable interest by various individuals and organizations has been expressed toward architectural and aesthetic controls in this area for some time, and we talk about letters referred to the council on this matter, and we indicate there may be other areas appropriate for special districts such as Mission Bay, where we already have such controls, and the University of California. The department believes that a comprehensive plan for the particular area should precede the establishment of such special districts. The plan is needed to provide well-defined goals and criteria upon which architectural controls can be justified. The department recommended then that the Planning Commission authorize the preparation of an ordinance along these lines, and we recommended the Commission meet with the Board of Architectural Review. So our position originally was, and it still is, that the existing regulations and the process is almost meaningless. That's our opinion. At that time, we said, let's have meaningful architectural control, but let's confine it to historic or civic areas of the city, where everyone knows there are some objectives to be achieved which relate to the general welfare of all of us. Since that time, and after several discussions with the board, there has been a lot of interest outside the board and outside the planning department, evidenced by various groups and individuals around the community concerned with the environment of San Diego on a pretty broad scale. What we're doing with public buildings and what we're doing with the waterfront and canyon development, a large number of problems that these people see. And there's been a lot of discussion by these groups and individuals as to the possibility of having some kind of formalized sounding board within government, or possibly even outside government, that could develop plans and programs, conduct educational campaigns, make studies concerning better environmental design and development of San Diego. They, as my understanding, have no concrete proposals to make it all. I would concur with essentially with the Architectural Review Board's presentation, and perhaps the best thing that could be done would be to continue their board in the ordinance for a few more months or a year, if that seems wise, and that perhaps an advisory committee could be appointed by the mayor or council to provide suggestions, recommendations as to what might be developed within the community during, say, maybe a 6-month period. I've heard this period bandied about. That a group of citizens, organization, architects, landscape architects, there's sociologists, all kinds of people concerned in this. That's right. Who would like to study the problem as they see it and make recommendations to the city council, and perhaps
well, in fact, we agree with their recommendation in general, that continue them, and in the meantime, ask for citizen response and assistance in developing ideas about where the future, what future steps might be taken.
I want to, Mr. Baldrick is next, but I have a thought here, and we did this with one other board, and we asked them to hold some public hearings. And I'm just wondering what the council would think about the Board of Architectural Review having some public hearings and hearing from the people on subjects such as canyon development. Sometimes when you hear from the people on various subjects such as canyon development, you get some pretty good ideas coming from the people, and then they might be able, as architects and businessmen, recommend to us something that would be beneficial to the city. Does that have any merit? What do you think, Councilman Schaefer?
Hard to get the people to come into a council meeting to sound off on something. Wondered if we could stir up the enthusiasm. It depends on what
They usually put up a high-rise La Jolla, they all show.
Mrs. Cobb?
Isolate a little what you're saying. You're talking about canyon development. We're obviously not talking about publicly owned land. We're talking about privately owned land. There are circumstances under which this can be done now in a particular neighborhood. At least when we inquired in our particular canyon, we were told what was to be expected by cooperative efforts there. So I don't really know what you're talking about by canyon development.
Well, maybe I
Some specifics we could tell you, I think, if you might. Maybe that would.
Well, are you talking about structures in it, or utilization?
No, I'm talking about utilization of it, not necessarily structures. Seems to me it fits into this word environment, which has been brought forward.
Well, there are already vehicles by which this can be done, unless I've been misinformed.
Mr. Scheidel?
Well, the thing that concerns me is we've got a board that has been in effect for a long time. It's been a pretty good knowledge to the board and the council that they didn't have the teeth whether they needed it or not. They also have some ordinances by which they're supposed to be working. And actually, using foresight and hindsight, what has happened in the past, what has gone wrong, what have been the recommended changes by the board, and so forth. I find here, for example, that they assign the responsibility to somebody in staff. They start out with somebody at the level of a registered architect or similar qualified training consideration, blah, 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 down to practically nothing. Then, these people may approve, conditionally approve, withhold approve, and so forth, with the rules and standards established by the Board of Architectural Review. Now, do we have these rules and standards? I'd like to get a look at them.
I don't have a copy.
Right.
But there are a set of rules by which a man at the counter can lay them open and say, well, the Board of Architectural Review, by this authority, you can't have it or you can have it.
Right, they're not that specific. There are a number of criteria or standards that have been developed. They aren't as comprehensive, perhaps they ought to be, but there are some rules that guide the zoning division as to whether this is way out of line or not.
Well, one of the things that I am concerned with, because we have had, and ever since I've been sitting here on the council, I've heard this continual hue and cry to the open spaces, the high-rise in Mission Valley of La Jolla, this sort of thing, and it goes on. And basically, the problems that seem to develop are two things: the lack of concern until after the problem develops by the citizens, and the other is, and a little bit selfish on the part of those of us who live around the edge of canyons, we like to have the guy who owns the property give it up, and we don't want to pay for it, you see, to keep a park for it. Now, these tools to implement these things are absolutely necessary, or you end up spinning your wheels. Now, if we're going to have a tendency to throw, I don't want to say a roadblock to progress, because this isn't always progress, but if we're going to slow things down to make sure that the aesthetics are taken care of, I'd like to see some reasonable tools that are acceptable to the public to bring about these things, which would mean
Well, the open spaces, whether it's park districts or whether it's a super assessment district and charge those with benefits and compensating the man you're taking his land, whatever it may be, there are these things that are involved. And every time we get in a Donnybrook, it's brought about by these things. The horse is out of the barn and brought about by lack of interest or maybe a little bit of selfishness by people not willing to invest their own time to protect their interests until it's too late, and then they expect you and us to take care of it. Responsibility to bring it about, I'm interested, but I want to hear some programs to do that.
I think what you're saying, if I interpret it right, if the board is going to continue, you want to give them a job to do while they're being continued.
Well, something that is achievable. I mean, I think the greatest planning in the world don't mean anything unless you can implement it. Now, something that's go halfway there that can be implemented, I think, is far more important.
Mr. Baldrick, you had something?
I'd like to make talk on 2 points. It seemed to me that when one of our denials goes to the council should have, being elected officials, the ability to say yea or nay. And at the present time, it doesn't. And I would be satisfied if the council could, in fact, support us and deny the building permit as this situation exists. Now, that is the kind of fees I'm talking about. If we cannot adjudicate this thing and get them to resolve it, the council could, for the benefit of the city, I think, say no. Now, at the present time, I understand that's not possible. If you deny it, all they have to do is wait the remainder of the 35 days, as you've mentioned, and they can go ahead and build it anyway. So I'm talking about in the appeal to the elected officials that they could, in fact, deny.
Okay, excuse me for interrupting you. You want this. Now, number one, can we legally do this? Can we adopt laws, is it within our power to adopt a law where a man who comes in and conforms to the building code, the zoning and everything else, that we can deny him a building permit because he wants to paint the building red?
As you know, the law as it stands right now is that you cannot base an ordinance on aesthetics alone. You have to have another object tied in with it. So for that purpose, my answer has to be no.
So
we're trying to keep
you'd have to have another object in mind.
I think have to circumvent the intent of that part of the law.
For instance, the historical site zoning is a good example of that, where they can't control architecture within the zone because of the object being that of preservation of a historical site.
May I elaborate?
Councilman Walsh is...
I interrupted this gentleman down here.
I beg your pardon.
Now, this is perhaps speaking in rebuttal to Mr. Fairman's thought on districts. We have no objection to districts, but somehow I feel that the zoning administrator, when he finds some blatant situation, should have somebody to bring it to help out. 3 cases. In a tract development where the garages were on the front of the house, we had a plan brought to us where the fellow intended to build a 2nd story on his garage with a very high ceiling, and to have a point in the middle of the roof. You could tell me what kind of roof this is, and the ridges, gable roof, and to side it with horizontal wood siding while the rest of the house was stucco. And when you looked at it, you realized that out on the front of this street was going to be what amounted to an old-fashioned frontier blockhouse. That's about what it was going to look like. So we asked the person if he wouldn't drop the ceiling by using little corners to drop to 18 inches and to stucco it the same as the rest of the house. We brought it in, we lowered the height, the board did a little architectural work with it, individual, to improve the appearance, and he was happy as ever and went away. But the point is, we would have had a problem in that neighborhood if the zoning administrator hadn't recognized that, my God, we're going to have a frontier blockhouse out there in this little neighborhood of stucco houses. I think we avoided a neighborhood problem before it happened.
To get free architectural services.
That's a fact. Dale and Dick are very good with their pencils to help these people conceive these things we're talking about, to try and show them. Now, we had another one that I think was very interesting. They proposed to move a house off of the edge of Mission Bay over into the middle of Pacific Beach. And the way the mover was going to set the thing on the house, the front door would have been in the backyard, and there would have been a blank wall on the street. And we suggested that they put a little planter across the front, put a little lean-to down the side, and consider another door they had as the front door and properly front door. I think that in this fully established neighborhood where there was this one vacant lot they were going to use, that we avoided once again a neighborhood problem before it ever happened. Now the third case is this last one that came before the council, and I would say that this probably demoralized the board considerably because a strange set of circumstances happened here. The city had on Hawk Street, just above Raynard Williams Road, on the top of the hill, that big broad street, had, when they paved that street, done a lot of fill. And there'd been so much fill that the bank was truly 45 degrees. It was just the maximum bank you could have, and it was just as smooth as an old fill can be. And it had been so much fill that they'd indented the curb about 4 feet into the street. I mean, the street narrowed at that point. If you recall that long, broad street going down the top of that, what amounts to a peninsula almost, just east of Nimberg Field. Okay, now the builder came and he said, I want to build 4 spec houses on this. And he said, I obviously can't maintain the setback, which was something like 15 feet to the rest of the block, or 12, something like that. I've got the note here from the time. 15 feet. So the zoning administrator said, well, I recognize your problem, and there is a house down below in the canyon, and my God, there's no point in bringing it out on the property line right above the man if you can hold it back. So if you will abide by Architectural Control Board review of your plan, I will allow a 0 setback, which will come right out to this almost indentation near the street. Okay, we did not approve the plan because they're hanging right above this poor guy living down the canyon. And then I went over and looked at the site, and I'm really acquainted with it. And so we sent it back to the architect, who was a good canyon architect, a man named Reed, right?
Yeah.
And a well-known architect on our board. They attempted to discuss this. They did get him to close up all the ducts underneath and all the exposed plumbing, and he agreed to stain it. So we suggested also plant it, but his engineer came back and said, the ground is so unstable there, we don't want to wet it. So this is where these footings are. Now that's a hell of a thing to talk about today, to excuse my French, but so we denied this thing 3 times, and it went to the council, and the council, because of the 2-day period, let it go. And those houses are now built there. Minimum setback, not proper control.
Let me ask you a question right here. He said, providing the man went along with what you said, he'd give him 0 setback, right?
Sure.
So you guys denied him. How'd he end up with a 0 setback? I don't think that would have denied it immediately.
Turns out that once he threw it into the Architectural Control Board, as I understand it, it's a 35-day thing hit. And his condition was perhaps ill-advised to start with. He didn't realize his twist. He thought dealing with a man across the desk, the man would in fact go along with this. Am I right, Shorty?
Yes, that's correct. Mr. Schneider, you probably should direct your question to the city attorney's office. In checking with them on this particular point, the condition imposed by the zoning administrator was that the architectural design must be approved by the Board of Architectural Review. It must be approved. He intended, I believe, not to run it through this 35-day period, but the board had to stamp it approved, and that the board did not do. But because it wasn't specifically worded in that fashion, the attorney's office ruled that the design of these buildings would be subject to the standard architectural control ordinance.
Councilman Moss.
Sitting here and digesting most of what we're saying, I come up with a couple of conclusions. I just throw them out. They're my own opinion. Number one, I don't know what's wrong with a guy that possibly does want to build a house that has no doors that front on the street. And assuming that he does, or that I do, I'm just wondering whether or not there should be a board, not knowing the background, but I know, say you have one realtor, that a realtor should sit in judgment, just as architects, whether they disagree among themselves in regards to different types of architecture, should be able to, over a whole city, be able to restrict a person's development in this nature. So if we did give you teeth, or we gave ourselves teeth to stop some of the things that you mentioned, the block house, the house with no front on the street, I wonder if that's good. I mean, in your opinion, it's a monstrosity. In someone else's opinion, it's a monstrosity.
But I think we have to also realize that possibly that as times change again, it may be a building before its time, or maybe a building that's a little bit behind its time. And I think the big criticisms that most people have of a lot of communities is that they're two-stated, that they're the tracks. The biggest criticism we have today is the leaning towards plan unit development and this type of planning is to get away from the stated, conservative, same frontage type thing all along. Now, my feeling from the analysis of what we're talking about today, that if I were asked to give the Architecture Control Board teeth to make it permanent, a restriction against this type thing, I would be totally opposed to it, because I don't think you can do it on that broad of an area, and I think that it wouldn't be right. The second thing I say is that looking at the Architectural Review Board and listening to the discussions we've had on the historical, that I think that if we're going to be effective in any way, it should be reduced to a district or to an area, where then you're not looking at every individual house and so on, but you're looking to a general appearance, and not necessarily into specific, but into a general appearance of an area, say Old Town, which is the example that's always used. That the historical board, or what I would rather see, from my own feeling, is the combination of your board and the historical board as one group, but really restricting it to districts, whether it be of a historic or of a scenic nature. And I think that with all our discussion, the thing that's been reduced to in my mind, I would be opposed to making it citywide. I would be opposed to giving the teeth that would say that you could definitely say no and not try and work with these people. And if we make it advisory, then I wonder how much you are getting into giving away free architectural services to these individuals.
We don't mind if it'll beautify the city. We feel that strong.
I'd like to well, we've got to give the Mr. Chairman a chance to respond here.
You know, we already found a paragraph here that I think is very important to bring out. Let me read it. To accommodate our exploding population and arrest the decay, we will build as much by the end of the century as we have built in the entire history of our nation. And when you stop and think that 80% of the dollar volume that goes through the building department is designed by unlicensed people, you're going to have a mess to contend with.
It's what we refer to as butcher paper drawings.
80% of the dollar volume in building permits is designed by unlicensed people.
Let me start my debate. Mr. Nagel, will you bear with me a minute? Okay, we do have architectural control. We've got more architectural control today than we had 4 years ago. And what does it come in? Comes in the form of building requirements, inspection requirements, the uniform building code.
There's no regard to aesthetics.
Right. But I'm saying, people coming in, it eliminates the 80% that come in without a license. Individual coming in, they have to conform with city requirements. It's a step towards direction. It's how far of a step do we want to take? And I'm in agreement that in certain areas, yes, we can do it. But I'm in disagreement when I say that if you can't apply it in too broad an area. Because I think you may be stifling in certain areas something that I think is creativeness and individuality. And that's the fear that I have. A district, and this is what, and that's why I threw it out. District-wise, yes, I think that it's really, that we should be overly restrictive. We should give legislation possibly in that area, enabling legislation, restrictive legislation. But on a broad base, then I think my time's up.
Well, let me ask you this, Councilman. Would you be willing to go so far as to eliminate front yard setbacks?
Would I?
Yes.
No.
That's aesthetics in itself.
Sure.
Yes, it is.
And
the reason
you said we didn't have some of planting in the front of our 4 properties, certain percentage aesthetics. We have aesthetics in there, side yard clearance, rear yard.
Now, my reason, Councilman, my reason for asking you that is because in the city of New Orleans, for example, there are many cases of no front yard setback. You know, they build out to the street and then they have their patio. Some of their places that are very fine homes have a middle patio, for example.
We could do that here now.
Can we do that?
But there are protections built in. You can have one man who can give a certain amount of relief in the setback.
and then the power is taken out of his hand that if there's more relief and you have no setback is given, then you have to go to public hearing so that the people and so on in the neighborhood can hear. But we have the possibility to give zero setback, build right on the line, and so on and things. But the degrees of relief or the degrees of variance require different levels of approval. And I think this is one of the things we don't realize a lot of times, that we do have all of these powers. We do have, as Harry pointed out, the architectural control of the M1A zone and the setbacks, the requirements for landscaping, and some of these other things. These are areas where I think we've included these things.
I've held Mr. Nagel up, and then Mr. Bates.
In our research, it was interesting to note that in the year 1932, they suggested that something be started to control, to help control the city environment, the architecture, and it started out with the main routes that come into San Diego. That's the first impression, the front door, the entry. Now, in 38, 39, it was increased to about 15,000 acres. Now, it was interesting that people petitioned to enter, and they went out and got signatures. In 39-40, 19,000 acres of 61,000 acres asked to be controlled. In 1940-42, 30,000 acres, that's 50% of San Diego, wished to be controlled. Now in 54, we decided it was illegal and we washed it out. And became said that everything had to be controlled. Now today, we're saying that they shouldn't be controlled. But yet, through this period of 10 years, 10 years, people petitioned to have some kind of control. They were concerned. They were worried. Now, the University of California, San Diego, has a pretty restrictive architectural control established there. And there is, I think Dick will go along with some of the things other architects have done. It's not necessarily restricting imagination or creative design. Now, if you want to start thinking about areas that have something to do with land value and preciousness of environment, throughout the years there's been Palos Verdes, Rancho Santa Fe, now there's Laguna Niguel. We're working on a 10,000 acre project which is called Mission Viejo, and others that we have worked with, and these are the big builders. All want architectural control, because land value and control. Now, when they say control, they're asking that they're getting their utilities underground. They're doing away with TV aerials. They're conscious of street architecture, benches. We're actually in these projects. We're planning a limited setback, so that a community will have variation. It'll be punctuated with one type of thing and another type of thing, so you don't get the monotony of tract houses. Now these are, this is what industry, who has come a long way and are very sensitive to the person who's going to move out of these other areas. And they're going into these other areas, and they can point right down the street to all this mess and show them where they're going to be into a better area that their control, their land value is going to maintain a control to it. As far as enforcing canyons, in some of these newer projects, they're organizing what's called housing associations, which will build houses around a canyon, and that group will pay for and maintain that canyon. It's kind of a localized taxes. We've been concerned on our board about houses which have this clutter underneath, and we thought one of the things the board could do in continuing to see these conspicuous things coming up, maybe we could instigate other groups like the AIA, the PCA, and other realtors associations to study and maybe turn out little handouts that could be given out over the counter to warn the builder or the carpenter who's drawing the plans of about what the city wants them to do. And we're, I think, pretty sensitive about a guy coming in with a creative design and not hammering away at it or picking it apart, and maybe it's presumptuous to think that boards in the future won't be as sensitive, but I think our form of government, you have to have that kind of faith. I drew a quick sketch to just illustrate what a house looks like that we get, and some type of pamphlet would be turned out to give a guy an idea about how to cover that thing up. It's and that's not too restrictive, and it sure serves as a help to the people have to look at it underneath. We didn't try to make a Frank Lloyd Wright out of the top of the house. We just merely take care of those things which are conspicuous. But I'd like to draw a point that in the past the city has asked for this thing, or the people have, or a large portion of the people have asked for some type of control. Now, the word control and power enforcement, I think, is what we're probably dwelling on today. We'd like to have a year to find out some method, some democratic method that is fair to everyone, and to continually meet on this and to research what others have done and see what we can do to get a better ordinance.
Mr. Bates, did you...
I wanted to comment on the point that Mr. Walsh made there concerning variances being granted for setback suspension. Today, our ordinance permits us to grant setback variances only where there's hardship involved, not aesthetic.
I couldn't go out to East San Diego and decide I'd like to eliminate the front setback and build a New Orleans type house, could I?
Yeah, if you could prove hardship.
Well, hardship on payments or hardship
New Orleans, why we might go.
I believe Councilman Morrow, who has been most patient, would like to lend his ability to this group.
Well, I don't know about ability there as far as talking about what these folks are doing, but in listening to all of the type of things that they're involved in and what they are doing, it would appear to me that we would be talking about perhaps their capacity as not only as advisors, but as sort of an appeal body, as a buffer between the council, also as giving them power within certain districts, maybe as being an arbitration board. One example that was brought up, I didn't quite get clear in my mind how you acted in the capacity, and this was the very last one that you spoke about up on Rinyard Way there. Could the man have built as he wanted to, under our codes and under our building provisions, period, what he wanted to do, without granting him an exception?
No, they had to have a variance, remember, from Shorty.
Now, if you did not grant the variance, he could not build.
No. Well, he could have. He could build anything. He could go out to the setback, and it'd be.
Then you entered into an agreement that if he would abide by the architectural review's decision, then you would give him the variances and so forth. In other words, you did have a legal tool over him, and he actually agreed.
May I answer just one question here? There is a point. There was a fellow by the name of Brabantwitz a few years back. Unfortunately, the man was hit and killed. But there could be others like him. For instance, in La Jolla, among very, very fine homes, this fellow attempted to take an old house, meet every building requirement of the city of San Diego. He took some, shall we say, roofing paper, or with little bricks. You know, you've seen that imitation of
shingles.
He runs horizontally, he ran it vertically and things, and you would like to have that next door to you? I think this board is important, generally, but I question too. Persuasive, fine, but not a lot of teeth, no.
Now, Councilman Schaefer.
I want to ask Mr. Wheeler, are you aware that gigantic house in South Mission Beach with the big metal?
Yeah.
How does the board feel about something like that? Now, I think that's great. A lot of people like to get someone's property.
Came forward and we approved it.
You drew it, I'm Irish.
The young fellow used to work for me, did.
Oh,
clever.
Kevin?
But I would like to respond to that one and say, go a little further south in Mission Beach, right by the jail. And
there's a lot of three-story building there that's...
Belongs to the next mayor, huh?
And I don't know who built it.
John Butler.
I think I'm personally offended by that.
Councilman Walsh.
Well, the personal offense and some of the other things is what leads me to my reservation on some of this. I personally feel that under the present procedure and the setup we have, really we're wasting your time. And why do I say wasting your time? It's because you're running out to one house overlooking a cliff and probably some of the best background and talent we have in the area sitting on the board, and we expand it, we're going to get more talent, and they're going to go out and they're going to save the community from one house or 1-2 stories. When possibly, if the areas of your activity could be advisory in the nature of legislation, if you spent a whole year and did nothing but can't come to the city and get an ordinance passed requiring all new subdivisions to have utilities underground. This is a form of architectural control. This is something that's been adopted by the city, and which is something which is environment.
Right.
We're aware of environment. We've got more and more from landscaping requirements, off-street parking requirements, all these things are put in. But the thing I hate to see is when we take a group such as yourself that gets into an area where really it's really ineffective, or you can try and work with individuals on a limited basis and on a single instance, where if you were advisory in scope and did your research in general areas on an environmental aspect citywide, and leave the architectural, when you get down to the building itself or the shape of the building, just to a district, then I think we would be getting the maximum use of your time. It wouldn't be as frustrating as it is to now, and I think the environmental effect of in the entire city would realize the benefit of your time. Right now, under the present procedures, I frankly think that we're not getting the worth out of your time. If we could.
Well, what part of the city would you have them look at to improve
Let
this?
them figure it out the next year. That's what they want to do.
All right, we must end this sometime, and we've got to decide. I know that we must. What we're going to do is decide whether to continue this board, and if we're going to continue, we should give them a job to do. Is the way I look at it.
We better give them some guidelines.
Guidelines.
Yes. Well, actually, I don't believe that you can legislate intelligence. I don't believe that you can legislate responsibility. We put the trees in and they don't water them, they're dead. What are you going to do with them? Now, we have this very real problem. I think persuasively. I mean, we had a couple that went through like this one up above. But the important thing is how many they save, maybe with these sketches or drawings and so forth. And this may be very good. I don't believe in the teeth element of this. I don't think at this point. I think it could be studied and some reasonable method of bringing it forward. I think you're persuasive and the idea is good. But I sit back and I think about horrible things that can happen that you have absolutely no control over because you don't need a building permit, like to paint a house, and what's wrong with the purple house with red doors, you know. Yeah, but see what I'm getting at? These are a bunch of little nitpicking things to be horrible. I saw a red house up here that way, up at Hamilton and Madison. Bright red speckled cloud. But I would like to see these fellows go back and go to work on this. Not necessarily take years to do it, and I go along with Jack's idea. Bite by bite, piece by piece, effectively go in this direction, realizing you're never going to get to the end, but a way of getting progress. And if the pamphlets are persuasive or what it might be, I think this is good. I don't like what we have now. I mean,
no, John is doing a job.
Go ahead, Councilman.
Okay. What I would rather see is to take the time to go back and review yourselves and see whether or not it would be better to eliminate you as a hearing board for individual cases that come to the city. Maybe let our building or our planning department and so on handle it. But then regroup yourself to study the environmental problems citywide and come up with recommendations in underground utilities, recommendations that you broaden, you get the architects, you get the builders, you get the developers, you get some of the other things, that you can come in from
we have nobody looking except in individual cases when we come up ourselves on zoning and subdivision requirements and so on, in the general environmental field. And I point to one example. One line in our ordinance, in our subdivision ordinance, has done more environmentally to communities, if you like, trees. A couple of years ago we said every subdivision will have one tree. Okay, before that we didn't. That one line has planted more trees in the city of San Diego than all of the groups that are running around in communities trying to get people to donate and dig holes for trees and so on. And I think that this is where, with your background, and you've got a lot of background in this field, you've seen some of the things come on that can advise us of legislation in the general area that we can take care of, rather than say you tie up each of your 3 or 4 hours when you meet with the arguments pro and con on one house on stilts.
All right, we must end this, and if I get the feeling of the council, it is a desire to continue this board. But it seems to me that if in continuing this board, you must give them what you would like for them to do during this period of time.
Now, this is the first meeting that we've had really for an exchange.
And
we've never had this before.
That's right.
And I think as a result of the meeting, not only do we have a better understanding of, say, some of the problems in the area, but I think you have an understanding, maybe not the whole council, a couple that did all the talking, but at least maybe now you can go back in a second meeting would be more productive, and you can go back and say, well, they maybe want this, maybe from our experience it wouldn't work, we'll go back and present it. And I think that rather than saying, yes, you're in existence for another year, schedule another meeting. All we're doing is a workshop. We'll continue the way it is until we come up with something better. And I would say in a month or 2 months from now to come back again and have another one of these 2-hour workshops. I think it's productive. I really do.
Mr. Daigle?
I just want to make sure everybody got. Oh, yeah.
Yeah, they're all.
Well, no, we haven't. Handed out the working paper. I don't know whether. Shall we? Sure.
Oh, sure.
Give them all the information we can. We have here abstracts from the current literature throughout the last, I don't know, maybe 300 years. Some of it's pretty old. That are the kind of things we've talked about and tried to figure out how to put into words. And it occurred to me, if you have time to read it, the first 2 pages are just the references, what it comes from, and then the rest of it is sort of paged out so that it has a little bit of a flow. And you can see what the literature is saying. It's pretty broad, and I think you may even find it amusing to read it because it's pretty.
I remember Mr. Abramowitz. Is that what it is?
I don't know.
Now, Mr. Fairman is going to sum this up, and then I'd like one of you councilmen to
make a great motion.
Make a motion.
All the problems.
Go ahead, Mr. Fairman.
Well, I didn't know I was going to follow up, Mr. Hitch, but apparently you want the board to continue its present functions and as well prepare recommendations on future programs and its activities for discussion with the council. The point I was going to make is what provision, if any, the council might wish to make for citizens groups who have become interested in this. Whether you would want them to deal with the Architectural Review Board, directly with the council, how you want to work this. See, there are a number of citizens representing groups ranging all the way from the Chamber of Commerce to Citizens Coordinate, architects, Western behavioral people, this sort of thing, who are interested in this, and they haven't any specific recommendations, but they feel there is a need for having some vehicle for expressing.
They're motivated to go somewhere better, huh?
Yeah, right, and perhaps they could be helpful. And by the way, I don't think they're thinking lies along control lines. They're thinking advisory kinds of programs.
The whole point. But if you have one house, Citizens Coordinate shouldn't be coming in with all of their eyes on aesthetics and environment on a house in
They
down
agree.
there.
They agree.
And this is my, I think we've tied you to the individual lots and the houses, and I think what I would rather see is this advisory board, like Al, I think it's an excellent idea. Hold hearings for the community, get an idea, be the funnel, be the focus point for all the people from Trees Unlimited that believe in landscaping as a consistent, the people with the open spaces, the billboard control people, all of these people who individually either came to us or come to the planning department. If under your present structure, you're not an environmental group. You're a individual building permit review board is what you're down to.
If you read our recommendations, we feel that we should evolve, not decease, but evolve into a finger of this bigger advisory, or whatever name it is, environmental advisory group. And we would like the opportunity to research, or not research, but get the feelings of other organizations and see maybe we still should have some contact with each house to get the feedback advantages of some of the problems that come up. But these are the things we'd like to set down and report back to you. And I believe after reading this, our next maybe workshop meeting, you could arrive at some guidelines.
I see some real problems. This looks like quite an ambitious program, which is real fine, but all of a sudden I see you're working with the planning department, the planning director, which you're talking about people and money. And all of a sudden we have a planning commission sitting out here who's kind of responsible for a budget in a way and what's going on, priorities in the business. Now, it looks to me like we might be getting ourselves a real many-headed monster and actually defeat what you're trying to accomplish. Most of your recommendations are okay, but according to the existing ordinance that we have, correct me if I'm wrong, this is not a function that's spelled out for you, so you're asking really to sit down and go towards to develop a real program to bring this about. And I was looking at the board contemplates and proposes the following action: to hold regular meetings, of each meeting consider a particular aspect of environment. I think that's good. I think everybody here agreed with that. Then the next B, you had provide an annual report to planning department and council of action taken by board. Well, this don't mean too much except where are you going. Now, I think if you people as a project prepare a positive program and possible legislation to bring about a more aesthetic community, something of this nature that can be effective in increments if necessary. I mean, if this becomes a stage, but to go back and set up a program of what you'd like to have in the areas you'd like to cover, and then I think that this has to be taken into consideration with the planning commission, because you're getting right on top of them, and I think you can run into some real conflict and a real dogfight, which will kill the whole thing you're trying to accomplish. Then down here in E, through a commission developed seven panels. I don't agree with necessarily the amount of them, but with the board to assist in formulating a recommendation for a board of greater, not scope, but effectiveness. I don't care how big the scope is, be effective. I mean, you can have the greatest scope in the world. But I think we're all talking in the same direction, but structurally setting this thing up, how are you going to have your hearings and get these people together and unite, and you can't pull half the planning staff out, because we're going to have why isn't this done? They're going to say we're working with the citizen group. We'll say, knock it off, get over here.
Now, Mr. Baldrick, go ahead, and we, this is the last one. We're going to decide what we're going to do.
For instance, we have not used the term public hearing very much because we have felt we're not in a position to solve them. But if you delegate that to us, then as one of our functions, perhaps we are. We had thought that we would, through our various personal relationships with people in the community, say, we would like you to come and we're going to put you on our docket and we'd like to hear what you have to say from your group. Citizens coordinates is pretty good one. The outfit that's been gestating about Old Town, perhaps. Certainly, each town council. But we would be willing to invite them to join us, and we would be willing to have public hearings if that is appropriate for us. And I think the attorney has to tell me whether our board can have public hearings. I don't even know whether we can or not. Can we have public hearings?
Take testimony and that sort of thing, you mean?
I don't know. What does a public hearing mean?
Take suggestions, I certainly think so.
And I think we could do it informally by just inviting a group and putting them on our agenda, which we have minutes of our meetings. So we think these kinds of things need doing, but we didn't know quite how to say it to you people, because you, after all, are the boss.
You can't have anything but a public hearing.
All right, would it be a public hearing if we invited someone in? I guess
I'm saying, by our law, any board, commission, or of the city cannot, according to the Brown Act, hold anything except a public hearing. Is this correct?
It's a position of legislation.
You're going to decide somebody's rights, ultimately.
One section of the code states that meetings shall be at the call of the chairman and at such other times as the rules of the board may determine.
But if they're not in the legislative position.
Yes, but let me explain what I was thinking of in suggesting public hearings. For the idea of hearing from citizens in our community that have all kinds of ideas. There's not a councilman here that goes anywhere that he doesn't run up against somebody that says, why don't you do this, or why don't you do that? And it many times, in my case, and I think in yours, it involves open space or changing the looks of things around the city. Some of the public buildings, for example. And that's what I meant, is hearing from the people. And you might have to listen to 100 suggestions, and 99 of them won't be real good, or they've been checked out before. But that citizen comes up with that 100th one, and you wonder why in the world you haven't thought of this before. It's worth sifting out of 100 to get that number, that one that really would mean quite a bit. It seems to me that with the experience that these gentlemen have had, that this is the kind of group that could do that.
Well, what are they going to hold public hearings? If your recommendation, they're going to hold public hearings and do what now? Just hope ideas generate?
They would be inviting people or organizations that in the past have indicated some interest in the way the city looks, is about the only way I can say it. In the way the city looks, or the way it should look. That was continue the board would be my suggestion, but give them this job to do of holding public hearings, and they could hold it in the council chambers at appropriate time. And there are people like BCA, and there are people like Citizens Coordinate, and people that would like to suggest what they would like to see our city look like. Yes, sir.
Well, I'd like to move one, that we continue the board, that we expand it to 9 members, and that we charge them with the responsibility to come back in first with what they feel their functions are and outline them, and the rest of it, period, as far as that goes. But the rest of it, as far as what you're talking about doing, that depends upon your own leadership. You can call public meetings. What's wrong with you getting hold of groups and having your investigative? It's nothing. There's no legal status to it. We're not changing anything. We're not reviewing people's rights or anything.
Yeah, you are. You have the right to delay them for 30 days.
They have that right already, unless we discontinue the board, I would assume.
Let me ask you a question, Floyd. You mentioned 9 people, and I said one 7 or 9 man board. I never heard the reason why you want 7 or 9 man board.
Well, we felt that perhaps it should encompass other professions other than those that it's restricted to right now. Pull in somebody, say, from graphics that is concerned with signs, such as here's a shot in Old Town. You wouldn't know it, would you? It's a mess.
It's legal. It's
legal.
This is
a historical area, too. But I mean, we think if guidelines are set up through persuasion, that you can get a better community.
Are you
out of it.
restricted now as to the types of people you can have on your architecture review board, or you're merely held back by the
the
result on numbers?
By numbers. We think a larger board would give us more people to work with and get a better cross-section of what is desirable in the community.
More people to talk across the table and be done too.
Councilman Welch?
I would be more in favor of, after this discussion, instructing this group and at this size to go back and reevaluate our discussion, hold public hearings in the field of environment within the community, and then come back with us under their belt, with the hearings under their belt, to sit down again and let's look at the structure. Because, well, I think that would be the best approach, because I'm not totally convinced in my mind that having you guys handle these individual problems, houses as they come up, is accomplishes anything.
Staff problem?
All right. Well,
I would move that we authorize the board to conduct public hearings and solicit ideas of suggestions in the environment as it affects the city, and as Alan puts it real well, how the people want our city to look now and in the future, and to reevaluate the area of activity of this board, and then come back to us with recommendations.
There you go.
You want to put a time on that?
Let's say 90 days.
I might second this. I want to find out how elaborate it's going to be and how much funds will be expended in work and materials, and if you have the staff time to do this, or do you need additional help and funding for your department to do it?
well, if it were done fairly simply by announcements in the newspaper and a few simple press releases and some communications with known groups who are interested in all that sort of thing.
Kind of a discount hearing you're talking about, huh? Okay.
Right. The $9.95 type of hearing, why, I think you'll get the people there with representations and so forth, and it should be a minimal amount of staff time involved. A little clerical work and sending out
one second, Jack. You come back in 90 days and we'll have a lot better background understanding and ideas from the community. Okay.
Well, if this is decided by the council, it's 90 days. I'm going to set it on the council docket for the nearest
for council conference docket?
Council conference docket for 90 days ahead.
If they are ready, why are we closed? That's all.
All right, there's a motion on the floor. I believe it was heard by everyone. Mr. Walsh's motion, seconded by Mr. Scheidel. Wasn't it, Mr. Scheidel?
Second in there.
Yeah, second.
That the Board of Architectural Review during the next 90 days will hold some public hearings, and they will come forward in another workshop session or conference in 90 days, letting us know what they've heard from the people, what the people think our city should look like in the future.
And also a review of their own makeup and structure.
Structure and organization.
Just a matter of passing, you mentioned expanding the board to 9, so you have some more people like the graphics and so forth. I can conceivably see where this could be 15 or 20 eventually. I'm wondering if it'd be better to have your policy board of your operations, say at 5, and have ex officio members that could you could add 2 as you need without coming here, because to get a 9-man board,
we'd have to change the ordinance
and all this sort of thing. I think if you consider this also, so that you can get full utilization, you might want to take one person out of citizens coordinate and one trees unlimited or whatever. Yeah, but I mean, think that over too. This is the problem.
All in favor? Opposed? So ordered.
In effect, Mr. Hitch, the ordinance
will remain the same.
Right. This has to be placed on your docket, regular docket, for approval now.
No, it doesn't, because we're not changing any ordinance.
And you're not spending any money. spending any money, and
No, don't they have to adopt it?
No.
Oh, then it's just the mayor.